Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. It was supposed to be a perfect weekend, just a simple, easy camping trip up at Twin Sisters Lakes. I'd been there a dozen times before, always with the family, and it never felt like anything but a safe, quiet place to get away from everything. My son, he's in his 30s. He came with me, and my daughter brought her boy, my grandson, who's 7 and full of that endless energy kids have. We drove up from Deep Creek Campground, the truck loaded down with gear, the 2 dogs, my old lab Bear and my son's border collie mix Scout, going crazy in the back, knowing exactly where we were headed. We got our spot right by the water, the one with the big flat rock that slopes into the lake. It was a beautiful day, the sun was out, but it wasn't too hot, and the air had that clean, piney smell that just fills you up. We set up the 2 tents, my son and I in one, my daughter and grandson in the other, about 10 feet away. We got a fire going, the kids fished off the rock, and we just existed. It was peaceful in a way that's hard to find anymore. We ate hot dogs and beans, told stupid jokes, and watched the sun go down, painting the sky in oranges and purples over the lake. I remember feeling completely content, just happy to be there with my family. My daughter had to leave after dinner. She had some work things she couldn't get out of, so she and my grandson packed up and headed out, leaving just me, my son, and the 2 dogs. The quiet after they left was different. It wasn't the peaceful quiet from before. It was heavier, like the forest was settling in around us, closing off the outside world. We built the fire back up, had a couple of beers, and talked about nothing important until the wood burned down to just glowing embers. The dogs were curled up by the fire, already asleep. Around 10, we decided to turn in. I remember zipping up the tent flap and feeling a little chill that wasn't there before. It was a clear night, the kind where you can see a million stars, but it felt colder than it should have. I didn't think much of it then. I just crawled into my sleeping bag, with Bear settling down right next to me on the outside of the bag, his back pressed against my side. My son was on the other side of the tent, and Scout was at his feet. I fell asleep pretty quickly, the kind of deep sleep you only get when you're tired from a day outside. I don't know what time it was when I first woke up, but it was pitch black, the kind of black where you can't see your own hand in front of your face. The fire was completely dead. I just laid there for a minute, listening. Everything was silent. Not a normal, quiet night silence, but a thick, dead silence. No crickets, no frogs from the lake, no wind in the trees. Nothing. It was like someone had put a glass bowl over our campsite. That's when I felt the first prickle on the back of my neck. It's a stupid thing, a feeling, but it was so strong. I felt like I was being watched. I must have laid there for 20 minutes, just straining my ears. When I heard it, it was a sound from way off in the distance, up on one of the ridges. It wasn't an owl or a coyote. It was a long, drawn-out call, a deep, whooping sound. It echoed through the valley, and it didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard in all my years in these woods. It was too structured, too deliberate. On a whim, a stupid, impulsive whim, I cupped my hands around my mouth and called back. I just gave a short, loud, "Hey!" out into the night. I don't know why I did it. It just felt like the thing to do. The silence that followed was even heavier than before. It felt like the whole forest was holding its breath. And then, from the exact same direction came an answer. It wasn't an echo. It was a response, a perfect mimic of my "hey," but lower, deeper, and it carried a weight to it that made my stomach drop. It was a return whoop, as they say, and hearing that term now makes my skin crawl because I know exactly what it means. I know what it felt like. It felt like a challenge or an acknowledgement. Right after that, an elk started bugling. It was close, maybe a few hundred yards away, down by the water. It was a frantic, scared sound, not the usual majestic call. It bugled once, twice, and then it just stopped, cut off. The silence rushed back in, and then from the hill right behind our tents, maybe 50 yards up, came the sound, a loud, sharp crack. It wasn't a branch breaking under its own weight. It was a solid, powerful knock, like someone had taken a big piece of lumber and smacked it hard against a tree trunk. A wood knock, I'd read about them, but hearing it, it's a sound you feel in your bones. It's a sound that says, "I am here." My son was still sound asleep, snoring softly. Bear, my loyal dog, who usually barks at a squirrel fart, hadn't made a peep. He was tense against my side, but silent. Scout was the same. That was maybe the first real wave of fear that hit me. Why weren't the dogs reacting? They had to have heard it. Their silence was more terrifying than any bark. That's when the real terror started. I was lying on my right side, facing the wall of the tent. My left arm was stretched out, and my hand was resting against the nylon fabric of the tent wall. I was frozen, just listening, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would break them. Then I felt it. Something stepped on the side of the tent. It was heavy, so incredibly heavy. The pressure came down right where my arm was, pinning my forearm and hand against the ground. It wasn't a sharp impact. It was a slow, deliberate placement of weight. I felt the individual pads of a foot, huge, through the thin nylon floor and the sidewall. I could feel the rough texture of the skin, the immense power in that one step. It wasn't a bear. A bear's footstep is different, more of a flat, blunt pressure. This had definition. I felt the shape of it. It stood there for what felt like an eternity, just pressing down. I couldn't move my arm. I couldn't breathe. I just stared wide-eyed at the wall of the tent, feeling this thing standing right next to me, separated by less than a millimeter of fabric. And then the pressure shifted. It moved up. I felt the weight leave my arm, and a moment later, something pressed against the top of the tent, right where my head was. It wasn't a poke. It was a broad, heavy pressure, like someone had laid their open palm on my head through the tent. At the exact same time, I heard a sound, a loud, low swoosh, like a heavy curtain being pulled very fast through the air, right next to my ear. The pressure on my head wasn't violent. It was almost inquisitive. But the sheer force of it, the implicit power, was absolutely paralyzing. I have never, ever in my life known fear like that. It was a primal, gut-level terror that turned my blood to ice and locked every muscle in my body. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even whimper. I just laid there, trapped in my sleeping bag, with this entity standing over me, pressing on my head. My mind was screaming, but my body was a statue. I was certain I was going to die. I was waiting for the tent to be ripped open, for claws or teeth or whatever it had to finish me, but it didn't. The pressure on my head lifted. I heard a soft, heavy footstep on the pine needles next to the tent, then another. It was walking away. The steps were quiet, unnervingly quiet for something that had just demonstrated it weighed more than any man. I could hear them, a soft crunch, 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 moving slowly around the perimeter of our camp. It was circling us. I don't know how long I laid there, rigid with fear. The footsteps kept making their rounds. They'd fade away for a few minutes, and I'd dare to hope it was gone. And then I'd hear them again, closer this time, from the other side of the tent. It was playing with us. It was letting me know it was still there, that it owned this space now. My son slept through all of it. The dogs never made a sound. It was my own private hell, a waking nightmare I had to endure alone. The night stretched on forever. The footsteps eventually stopped, but the feeling of being watched never went away. I didn't sleep another wink. I just stared into the darkness, listening to every tiny sound of the forest, which had slowly started up again. The crickets came back first, tentatively, then the frogs. It was like the world was exhaling. The first hint of dawn was a pale grey light seeping through the tent fabric when I heard the final sound. It came from the same hill behind us, one single, sharp crack, a wood knock. It wasn't as loud as the first one, but it was just as clear. A final message. We're done here. You can go now. As soon as it was light enough to see, I moved. My body was stiff and aching from being tensed up all night. I unzipped the tent with shaking hands and crawled out. My son stirred, finally waking up. "Morning," he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "Sleep okay?" I just looked at him. He had no idea. None. He'd slept through the most terrifying night of my life. I didn't even know how to begin to tell him. The words felt too big, too crazy. "We're leaving," I said, my voice hoarse. "Now." He started to argue, saying we had another day, but he took one look at my face and stopped. He saw the raw fear there. He just nodded and started packing his stuff without another word. We didn't make coffee, we didn't make breakfast. We just tore down the tents, threw everything haphazardly into the truck and got the dogs in. The whole time, the back of my neck was tingling. I felt exposed, like we were being watched from the tree line. We didn't speak on the drive out. We just drove, the tires crunching on the gravel road, putting distance between us and that lake. My hands were still shaking when I finally pulled onto the paved highway. It's been months now, and I still think about it every single day. I can still feel the pressure of that foot on my arm, the weight on my head. I can still hear that swooshing sound. The weirdest part, the part that keeps me up at night, is that I'm not just scared. I am. I'm terrified, but there's a part of me, a stupid, crazy part that is so damn curious. I want to know what it was. I want to have seen it. Just a glimpse, just to know. We left shaken, and we never went back, but that curiosity is like an itch in my brain I can't scratch. I was right there. It was right there touching me, and I'll never know. Story 2. I remember the car was a beat-up old Ford Granada, a real boat of a thing. The vinyl seats were cracked and hot to the touch, and the smell of stale cigarette smoke and spilled beer was just part of the atmosphere. We had the windows rolled down because the air conditioning had given up the ghost a year before, and the radio was tuned to some rock station, the music tinny and fighting against the chorus of crickets and frogs from the pond. The pond itself wasn't anything special. It was maybe a couple 100 yards across, surrounded by woods on 3 sides. The south side, though, that's what's important. That side was choked with cattails, and I mean choked. They were monstrous things, 7 feet tall if they were an inch, standing there like a dense, silent army in the shallow water. We were just facing the water, the headlights of the car pointing at the open part of the pond, drinking our beers and talking about nothing. Football, girls, what we were going to do after graduation, the usual dumb stuff. The first thing that was off, and I remember this clear as day, was the frogs. They just stopped. 1 second, it was this constant rhythmic croaking, and the next it was dead quiet, not a peep. We didn't really notice it at first, our own noise was covering it up. But then my one friend, the guy in the passenger seat, he shushed us. "Hey, shut up a second," he said. We did, and that's when we heard it. From the south side of the pond, from deep in that wall of cattails, came this growl. It wasn't an animal sound, I knew. It wasn't a dog, wasn't a coyote, wasn't a bear. It was deep. I mean, a deep, resonant, loud growl that you didn't just hear with your ears. You felt it in your chest like the bass from a massive speaker. It vibrated right through the car door. We all froze. My beer can was halfway to my mouth and I just stopped, my hand hanging there in the air. We all looked at each other, and in the dim light from the dashboard, I could see the same wide-eyed, "What the hell was that?" look on all their faces. "Turn on the brights," I said, my voice coming out as a whisper, even though there was no reason to whisper. The guy in the passenger seat fumbled for the knob on the dashboard and pulled it. The high beams clicked on, 2 powerful shafts of white light that cut through the darkness, and lit up the edge of the cattails. And that's when we saw it. It was standing right at the tree line, right where the solid ground met the base of those 7-foot cattails. My brain just short-circuited for a second. It was big. I mean 8 feet tall easy. It was built like a gorilla, but it was standing upright on 2 legs. Its whole body was covered in this shaggy black hair that looked wet and matted in places, but its head was cone-shaped, like a soft-serve ice cream cone, and it was totally hairless. The skin was dark like leather, and its eyes, oh God, its eyes, they were glowing, not reflecting the light, but actually glowing with this sickly, pale green light from within, like 2 little jars of radioactive fire. It was just standing there, maybe 50 yards away, and it was moving its head slowly from side to side, like it was scanning the area. Then it blinked. I saw the eyelids, dark and heavy, slide down over those glowing green orbs, and then open again. It was so deliberate, so intelligent. It wasn't the blank stare of a dumb animal. One of my friends in the back seat let out this strangled gasp, like he'd been punched in the gut. Nobody said a word. We were all just paralyzed, staring at this thing that had no business existing in Mississippi or anywhere else on Earth. It made a sound then, a low, guttural grunt that rumbled out of its chest. It wasn't the growl from before. This was different, more contemplative. It took a half step forward, one of its huge, human-like feet squelching in the mud at the water's edge. That broke the spell. "Lights off! Lights off!" The driver yelled, his voice cracking with panic. The passenger snapped the headlights off, and we were plunged into near total darkness. The only light was the faint green glow from the dashboard. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it was going to break out. I could hear my own blood roaring in my ears. "Start the car! Start the damn car!" Someone, maybe me, was screaming. The driver already had the keys in the ignition. He turned them. The engine gave this tired, whining sound, like an old man groaning as he got out of a chair. It didn't catch. It just whined and then sputtered out. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," the driver moaned, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the key. He tried again. Whirr, clunk. Nothing. That's when the thing let out another sound. This wasn't a growl or a grunt. This was a roar. It was the most terrifying sound I have ever heard in my life, before or since. It was like a lion's roar, but deeper, louder, and filled with this pure, raw fury that felt like it was shredding the air itself. It wasn't just loud. It was heavy. The sound pressed in on the car, on my eardrums, on my soul. The windows in the car actually vibrated. I could feel the vibration in the steering wheel, in the seat, in the bones of my jaw. It was a sound that promised violence, a sound that said it could tear the car apart with its bare hands if it wanted to. I felt a warm trickle down my leg and realized with a hot flush of shame that I had pissed myself. I didn't even care. The fear was that absolute. The roar seemed to go on forever, echoing out over the pond and silencing the entire world. When it finally stopped, the silence that followed was even worse. It was a thick, expectant silence. The driver was sobbing now, just muttering, "Please, please, please," as he turned the key for the 3rd time. The engine coughed, caught for a second, died. "Turn the lights on," I shouted. I had to see. I had to know if it was coming for us. The passenger, his face a mask of pure terror, yanked the headlight knob. The beams shot out again, illuminating the same spot. It was still there. It hadn't moved closer. It was just standing in the exact same spot, its glowing green eyes locked directly on our car. It was so still, so unnaturally still. It was just watching us. The sheer malevolence coming off it was a physical force. It wasn't curious, it wasn't scared, it was just observing its prey, trapped and helpless. The driver tried the ignition again. This time, with a sound like angels singing, the engine roared to life. It was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. He didn't even put it in gear. He just slammed his foot on the gas pedal, and the car's tires spun in the gravel, spraying rocks and dirt everywhere. The engine screamed as he wrestled the shifter into drive, and the car lurched forward. He didn't turn the wheel to follow the road at first. He just aimed us away from the pond, driving straight across the grassy field, bouncing and jolting over ruts and bumps. My head smacked against the roof of the car. Beer cans flew everywhere, spraying their contents all over the interior. Nobody looked back. We were all just hunched forward in our seats, braced for impact, waiting to feel the car get ripped open from behind. I could feel the thing's eyes on the back of my neck. I kept expecting to see a huge, black, hairy hand smash through the rear window. He finally swerved back onto County Line Road, the tires squealing in protest. He kept the gas pedal floored, the speedometer needle climbing past 70, 80, 90 on a dark country road. We didn't say a word for the first 5 minutes. The only sounds were the wailing engine, the wind screaming through the open windows, and our own ragged, panicked breathing. When we finally hit the main road with streetlights, he slowed down to something resembling the speed limit. We all just looked at each other. The guy in the passenger seat was crying silently, tears just streaming down his face. The driver's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The guy in the back seat with me was just staring straight ahead, his face completely blank, in shock. We never talked about it again. Not the next day, not ever. It was like an unspoken pact. We all knew what we saw, and we all knew that talking about it wouldn't change it, wouldn't explain it, and would only make it more real. We just went on with our lives. But something in me was broken that night. A fundamental sense of safety was just gone. I moved away from Jackson in 1996 for a job up north. I never went back to that pond. I don't even like driving on country roads at night anymore. But it's that roar that I can't forget. I'll be 63 years old this year, and sometimes, if I'm somewhere really quiet and my mind wanders, I can still hear it, not as a memory, but as an echo. That deep, earth-shaking, lion but louder roar that came from a creature that shouldn't exist. I saw it, we all saw it, standing there in the headlights with its glowing green eyes and its cone-shaped head, and I have never, for a single day in all the years since, been able to explain what it was. Story 3. I've been sitting here for about an hour, just staring at this blank box, trying to figure out how to even start typing this out. My hands are still a little shaky, and every time I think about hitting post, I get this cold feeling in my stomach. But I have to get it out. I have to tell someone, even if it's just strangers on the internet, because keeping it bottled up for so long has been its own kind of hell. So here goes nothing. This happened about 7 years ago. I was renting this old farmhouse off Highway 100 in Hickman County, Tennessee. It was a temporary thing, just a place for me and my kids to land for a few months, while I got back on my feet after my divorce. The house itself was old, not in a charming, rustic way, but in a creaky, settled into the earth kind of way. The floors slanted in places, the pipes groaned like a dying man, and the wind always found a way to whistle through a crack you couldn't even see. The landlord was cheap, so nothing ever got fixed properly, but the rent was low, and it had a big yard for the kids to run around in. At the time, that was all that mattered. The property backed up against what felt like endless woods. There was a cross fence, one of those wooden ones that's more symbolic than functional, separating the scraggly backyard from a big, overgrown field that eventually gave way to a thick tree line. I never liked looking out at those trees, especially at night. They were just too dark, too dense. It felt like they were watching the house. The morning it happened was a Tuesday, I'm pretty sure. It was early, real early. The sun was just starting to think about coming up, so the world outside the kitchen window was all greys and deep blues. It was that quiet, heavy time of day where every little sound seems amplified. I was alone in the kitchen, washing up some dishes from the night before that I'd been too tired to deal with. My son and daughter were still fast asleep in their rooms down the hall. The only light was from the bulb over the sink. casting a weak yellow glow on the countertops, and the only sound was the splash of water and the clink of plates. I was just scrubbing a pan, my mind a million miles away, thinking about bills, about work, about the sheer, exhausting effort of just getting through the day, when I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, through the window, over the cross fence, out in the field. I stopped what I was doing and looked up, my hands still submerged in the soapy water. At first I thought it was a deer. We had plenty of them around, but this was different. It was bigger, a lot bigger, and it was moving wrong. It wasn't the graceful, bounding run of a deer. This was something else. I wiped my wet hands on my jeans and leaned closer to the window, my breath fogging a small circle on the cold glass. I squinted, trying to make it out in the dim light, and then my brain just stopped. It sort of stuttered and froze because what I was seeing didn't make any sense. It was a figure, a person. No, not a person. It was huge. I mean, genuinely, massively huge. It was tan-colored, like old canvas or dry dirt, and it was covered head to toe in what looked like long, shaggy hair. But there were patches on it, darker areas that looked almost wet, like it had been wading through a creek or something. The thing that really got me, the detail that seared itself into my brain, was its height. The cross fence was about 4 feet tall, I'd guess, and I could see its legs clearly over the top of it. Its legs, over a 4-foot fence. It was hurrying, not running flat out, but moving with this powerful, deliberate stride across the field, heading straight for the far tree line. Its arms swung in a rhythm that was almost human, but heavier, more purposeful. The hair on its body was long, matted in places, and it swayed with its movement. I could see its face, or what I could see of it through all the hair. There were 2 dark spots for eyes, and I could make out a nose, just a darker bump in the center of its face. There was no mouth that I could see, just a mass of hair. I stood there, completely frozen. My heart wasn't just beating fast. It felt like a wild animal was trying to punch its way out of my chest. My breath caught in my throat, and I remember a cold sweat instantly breaking out all over my body, under my arms, down my back. This wasn't curiosity. This was pure, undiluted terror, a deep, primal fear that comes from a place you didn't even know you had inside you. My first stupid, panicked thought was for my kids. Were the doors locked? Was the back door locked? I'd just taken the trash out earlier. Had I locked it? I couldn't remember. I tore my eyes away from the window and ran from the kitchen, my socks slipping on the linoleum floor. I didn't run to the door, though. I ran to my bedroom, which had a window that gave a slightly different, longer view of the field. I remember my shoulder bumping hard against the doorframe as I rushed in, a pain I wouldn't even feel until hours later. I stumbled to the window, my hands fumbling with the thin cotton curtains, pulling them aside. It was still there. It was almost to the trees. The way it moved. It was so fast, so fluid for something that massive. It wasn't clumsy, it was powerful. It covered ground in a way that seemed impossible. I watched, my face pressed to the cold glass of the bedroom window as it reached the edge of the woods. It didn't slow down. It just disappeared into the shadows between the trees. One moment it was there, a giant, impossible shape in the half-light, and the next the forest had just swallowed it whole. And then it was gone. The field was empty, just tall, wet grass swaying in a breeze I couldn't feel. The woods were just woods again, silent, still. I didn't move. I stood at that window for what felt like forever, just staring at the spot where it had vanished. My whole body was trembling, a fine, constant shake that started in my hands and went all the way down to my knees. I could feel my pulse throbbing in my neck, in my temples. My mouth was so dry it felt like it was full of cotton. The logical part of my brain, the part that paid bills and packed school lunches, was screaming at me. It was a bear, a really big, weird-looking bear. It had to be. You're tired, you're stressed, you saw a bear and your mind played tricks on you. But I've seen bears. We have black bears around here. This wasn't a bear. The proportions were all wrong. It walked too upright. Its legs were too long. Its arms swung like a man's. A bear's fur doesn't look like that. Long and almost uniform in length all over its body, and the size. God, the size. It was taller than any bear I'd ever seen, taller than any man. I kept replaying the image of its legs moving over that fence. It was so casual. The fence was nothing to it. Slowly, like I was moving through deep water, I walked back to the kitchen. The sink was still full of soapy water. The pan I'd been scrubbing was sitting on the counter. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. But the whole world felt different, tainted. The safety of my home, this little bubble I'd created for me and my kids, felt like it had been popped. I looked out the kitchen window again. The field was empty. The woods were dark. I kept expecting to see it again, to see it step back out of the trees and look right at the house, right at me. I thought about going outside. The thought actually crossed my mind, to go look for tracks, for proof. But the fear was a physical weight holding me in place. What if it was still there, just inside the tree line, watching? What if I went out there and it came back? The idea of being out in the open, with that thing somewhere in the woods. No, absolutely not. I couldn't do it. I locked the back door. I checked the front door. I went around and made sure every single window was locked, even the little high-up ones in the bathroom that no one could possibly get through. Then I just stood in the middle of the living room, listening. The house was so quiet. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. I could hear the faint sound of my son's breathing from his room. And every creak of the old house, every pop of the floorboards settling made me jump. My heart would leap into my throat, and I'd stand there, frozen again, waiting for something to happen. The sun finally came up properly, filling the kitchen with a light that felt too cheerful, too normal for what had just happened. I made coffee on autopilot, my hands shaking so badly I spilled grounds all over the counter. I couldn't drink it. My stomach was in knots. When the kids woke up, I had to act normal. I made them breakfast, cereal, I think, and packed their lunch boxes. I smiled and asked them if they'd slept well. I helped my daughter with her shoelaces. The whole time my skin was crawling. I felt hyper-aware of every window. I kept glancing out of them, my eyes constantly darting toward the field, toward the woods. Driving them to school was a nightmare. The short walk from the front door to the car felt exposed and dangerous. I kept scanning the tree line, expecting to see that tall, tan figure standing there just watching us. I didn't see anything. The woods were just woods. The field was just a field. I thought about telling someone, I really did. I thought about calling my mom. But what would I say? "Hey, Mom, I saw Bigfoot in the backyard this morning." She'd have thought the stress had finally broken me. She'd have started talking about me seeing a therapist again. I thought about telling a friend, but the same thing. They'd laugh, or they'd give me that concerned, pitying look. I couldn't handle that. The fear of being thought insane was almost as powerful as the fear I'd felt watching that thing cross the field. So I didn't tell anyone. I went to work. I came home. I made dinner. I put the kids to bed. I did everything I was supposed to do, but I was a ghost going through the motions. The fear never really went away. It just settled into a low, constant hum in the background of my life. For weeks, I was a prisoner in my own home after dark. I never went out into the backyard past dusk. I bought heavy-duty curtains for every window and kept them closed once the sun went down. Every little noise from the woods made me tense up. The hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves in the wind, it all sounded like a threat. I did eventually go out into the field, weeks later, when the fear had dulled from a sharp blade to a blunt ache. I walked to the spot where I'd seen it. The grass was trampled down in a path. But that could have been from anything. Deer, the landlord's dog, anything. I didn't find any footprints. The ground was too hard and grassy. There was no proof. No giant, man-like foot pressed into the mud. Nothing, but I didn't need proof. I knew what I saw. I saw it with a clarity that haunts me to this day. I saw its size, its color, the way its hair moved, the powerful, effortless way it covered the ground. I saw its face, or what little I could see of it, those dark eyes, that one sighting, that single terrifying glimpse at 6 in the morning on a random Tuesday, changed something fundamental in me. I'd always been vaguely aware of the Bigfoot stories, the stuff on TV, but I'd never given it much thought. It was just campfire stuff, nonsense for people who wanted to believe in monsters. I don't think that anymore. I know they're out there, whatever they are. I don't know if it's an animal or a relic or something else entirely. I don't care about the scientific explanations or the skeptics. I saw it. It was real. The terror I felt was real. It solidified a belief in me that has never ever wavered since. We moved out of that farmhouse a few months later. I never told the landlord why. I just said I found a place closer to town. I couldn't stay there, looking out at those woods every single day, wondering if it was still out there, watching the house, waiting. I still live in Tennessee, but in a suburb now, with neighbors close by and streetlights that come on at night. I feel safer here. But sometimes, on a really quiet night, if I'm taking the trash out and I hear something rustle in the bushes at the edge of my yard, I'll freeze. Just for a second. My heart will do that little jump, and I'll get that cold sweat on my back, and I'll remember what it felt like to stand at my kitchen window, with my hands wet and my kids asleep, and watch something impossible walk right through my life and disappear into the trees. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that it was real. Story 4. It was May 29th, 2010, a Saturday. I remember the date because it was the weekend after Memorial Day, and we'd decided to get one last camping trip in before the real summer heat baked Arizona into a brick. My son and I were up in the pine forest near Forest Lakes, a spot we'd been to a handful of times before. It's off Forest Road 115, a dirt track that gets pretty rough if you don't have decent clearance. We were in my old Tacoma, so it was fine. The day had been normal, perfect even. We'd set up camp in the late afternoon, the same clearing we usually used. It's a good spot, ringed by tall ponderosa pines with a clear view of the sky and a decent fire pit someone had built out of local rocks. We'd set up our tent, gathered firewood, the usual routine. I remember the air started to get that cool, piney bite to it as the sun went down. We got a fire going, and I was cooking hot dogs on a stick, the way he likes them, a little blackened. He was 16 then, tall for his age, already 6 feet, a good kid. We were just talking about nothing, school, a girl he liked, the upcoming summer, normal stuff. It was after we'd eaten. The fire was starting to die down to a bed of glowing coals, and the woods were that deep, velvety black that only happens miles from any town light. I was standing by the fire pit, maybe 10 feet from the tent, just staring into the coals, feeling that pleasant tiredness you get from a day outside. My son was sitting in one of our camp chairs, fiddling with his phone. No service, but he had some music downloaded. I happened to look up from the fire, out past the ring of our campfire light, into the trees. There's a gap between 2 particularly big pines, maybe 50-60 yards away, and something walked through it. My first thought, my absolute first solid thought, was that it was a hunter. A guy in one of those full-body camouflage suits, the ghillie suit things. It was just a dark, bulky shape moving from my left to my right, and it was tall. But the thought only lasted for a second, maybe 2, because the way it moved was wrong. It wasn't a human walk, it was this powerful, fluid stride, like it was on a track, just eating up the ground. It took 2, maybe 3 steps to cross that whole gap, a distance that would have taken me at least 6 or 7. And it was completely silent. No crunch of boots on pine needles, no rustle of branches, nothing. It just flowed through the space between the trees and was gone into the darkness on the other side. It didn't look at us. It didn't turn its head. It just moved with a purpose, like it was going somewhere specific, and we were just part of the scenery. My breath just stopped in my chest. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the forest. I couldn't make a sound. I just stood there, frozen, my eyes glued to the spot where it had disappeared. My brain was screaming, trying to process what I'd just seen. It was so big. The sheer scale of it didn't hit me at first, not until a few seconds later. It was just this overwhelming impression of mass and height and silent power. "Dad?" my son said. He must have seen the look on my face. "You okay?" I finally managed to swallow, but my throat was sandpaper. I pointed a shaky hand towards the trees. "Did you see that?" My voice was a whisper, tight with a fear I didn't even understand yet. He stood up, following my gaze. "See what?" "Something. A person, I think, just walked through there." I didn't say what I was really thinking. I couldn't. It sounded insane even in my own head. He squinted. I didn't see anything. Probably just a hiker. But it wasn't a hiker. Hikers make noise. They have backpacks. They swing their arms. This thing, its arms moved, but they were longer, and the motion was different, and no hiker is that tall. The top of its head was well above the lowest branches of those pines. A cold dread started to pool in my stomach, a heavy, sick feeling. The woods, which had felt peaceful and familiar just minutes before, now felt like a different place entirely. The darkness between the trees felt thick, hiding things. "Stay here," I told him, and I took a few steps towards the edge of our camp, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was straining to hear anything. A footstep, a snapped twig, anything. But there was nothing. The normal night sounds, the crickets, the little rustles in the underbrush had all stopped. It was dead quiet, eerily quiet. The only sound was the faint crackle of our fire. That's when the memories of our other trips here came flooding back. The previous summer, we'd had rocks thrown at our camp in the middle of the night. Not big ones, just small, fist-sized stones that would land with a thump in the dirt just outside the ring of light. We'd shouted, flashed our lights, thinking it was kids messing with us, but we never saw anyone. And another time, I'd woken up to take a leak and saw a pair of eyes reflecting my flashlight beam from deep in the trees. They were too high up, and the color was wrong. Not like a deer's, a dull reddish orange. I'd written it off, convinced myself it was just some animal, a trick of the light. Now, I wasn't so sure. I walked back to my son, my legs feeling like rubber. "Get the big flashlight," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He pulled it out of the tent, one of those heavy-duty LED ones. I took it from him, my hand trembling so badly the beam jittered across the ground. I pointed it towards the gap in the trees where I'd seen the thing. "Come with me," I said. I didn't want him out of my sight. We walked slowly towards the trees. Every shadow seemed to move. Every pine needle that brushed my jacket made me jump. The beam of the flashlight felt pitifully small against the vast darkness of the forest. We got to the gap. The ground was a carpet of dry brown pine needles. I swept the light back and forth, looking for footprints, for any sign. There was nothing, no impression, no broken twigs. It was as if nothing had ever been there. But I knew what I saw. I needed to prove it to myself. I needed some kind of scale. "Stand right here," I told my son, positioning him in the middle of the gap, right where the thing had passed. "Look straight ahead." He did, confused but cooperating. He's 6 feet tall. I stood back and looked at him. Then I looked up at the space where the top of the thing's head had been. A cold shock ran through my whole body, a physical jolt that made the hair on my arms stand up. The top of my son's head was level with where this thing's shoulders had been. Let me say that again. My 6-foot-tall son, standing on the ground, only came up to its shoulders. I felt dizzy. I actually had to put a hand on a tree trunk to steady myself. My son was looking at me, his face pale in the flashlight beam. "Dad, what is it?" "How tall do you think that would make it?" I asked him, my voice barely a whisper. He looked up, his eyes tracing the invisible line from his head to where I was pointing. His expression changed from confusion to disbelief, and then to a dawning, wide-eyed fear. That's not possible," he stammered. "That's over 7.5 feet. 8, maybe." over 7.5 feet tall and built like a refrigerator. Not lanky, but thick, powerful. That's what I couldn't get over, the sheer mass of it. It wasn't just tall, it was enormous. We stood there for a minute, maybe two, just listening. The silence was the worst part. It was a heavy, waiting silence, the kind of silence that feels like it's pressing in on your eardrums. There were no crickets, no owls, nothing. It was as if every living thing in the forest was holding its breath, hiding from whatever had just passed through. We hurried back to the camp, the beam of the flashlight dancing wildly ahead of us. I felt exposed, like 1,000 eyes were watching us from the dark. We didn't speak. We just started packing up, our movements frantic and uncoordinated. We shoved the tent, still half-staked, into the back of the truck. We threw the chairs and the cooler in. We didn't care about being neat. We just wanted to be gone. I kept the big flashlight in my hand, sweeping the tree line constantly. My heart was still racing, a frantic drumbeat in my ears. My skin was crawling, covered in goosebumps that had nothing to do with the cold. It was pure, primal fear, the fear of being prey. As I was throwing the last of our gear in the bed of the truck, I heard it. It wasn't a loud sound. It was a low, guttural something. It's hard to describe. It wasn't a growl, not really. It was deeper than that, more resonant. It was a sound that you feel in your chest, more than you hear with your ears. It came from the direction the thing had gone, but it seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrating through the trees. It wasn't aggressive. It was just there, a presence, a statement. That sound sealed it for me. This wasn't a bear. It wasn't a lost hunter. It was something else, something that shouldn't exist. We jumped in the cab, locked the doors, and I started the engine. The headlights cut 2 bright tunnels into the night, and I spun the truck around, spitting gravel, and gunned it down Forest Road 115. I didn't slow down for the bumps. I just drove, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror again and again, expecting to see some massive dark shape loping after us. We didn't talk for the first 20 minutes. We just listened to the sound of the tires on the dirt road and our own ragged breathing. Finally, my son spoke, his voice small. "What was that, Dad?" And I had no answer. I still don't. I've turned it over in my head 1,000 times since that night. I've read things online, listened to stories. People talk about Bigfoot, Sasquatch. I never put any stock in it before. I thought it was all just stories for TV shows. But I know what I saw. I saw a creature that was over 7.5 feet tall, built like a powerlifter, that moved in complete silence and covered ground with a stride that wasn't human. It didn't notice us, or it didn't care. It was just passing through. The rocks, the eye shine from before. It all clicked into a terrifying, coherent picture. We weren't alone in those woods. We never had been. That was 14 years ago. My son is a man now, with his own life. We don't talk about it much, but I've never gone back to that part of the forest. I still camp, but it's different now. I'm always listening. I'm always watching the tree line. I can't look at the woods the same way. I used to see peace and quiet. Now I see a place where things that don't make any sense can just walk through the trees in the dead of night, silent as a shadow, and vanish without a trace. And I know, with a certainty that still chills me to the bone, that it was real. Story 5. Okay, so I've been sitting on this for a while, but I need to get it out there. I've been camping at Oxbow State Park along the Sandy River in Oregon for over 20 years, since I was a kid, really. It's always been my safe place, you know, the kind of spot where you go to forget about everything else. But last summer, something happened there that changed all of that forever. I was there with my 4-year-old son, just a little weekend trip to get him away from screens and into nature. He loves the outdoors, and I wanted to share that with him, like my dad did with me. That morning, we woke up early. The sun was just starting to filter through the trees, and the air was cool and damp. I remember the sound of the river nearby, a constant gentle rush that usually calms me down. We had breakfast, some oatmeal and fruit, and my son was bouncing around excited to explore. I decided we'd take a walk through the woods behind our campsite. It's a trail I've hiked dozens of times, so I didn't think twice about it. I packed a small backpack with water and snacks, and we headed out. The path was muddy from recent rain, and I had to hold my son's hand to keep him from slipping. He's small for his age, so I was extra careful. We walked for about 20 minutes, chatting about nothing important. He was pointing at birds and asking questions about everything. It was peaceful, the kind of morning you wish would never end. Then we came to this ravine I've seen before. It's steep, really deep, and overgrown with vines and trees so thick it's like a jungle down there. I've always thought it was kind of eerie, but I never had a reason to be scared of it until that day. We were standing at the edge, looking down into the ravine. My son was tossing pebbles over the side, laughing when they disappeared into the greenery below. I was just watching him, feeling that warm parent pride when I heard it. A loud crack, like a thick branch snapping. It came from about 100 feet away across the ravine. My head snapped up and I saw the brush moving. Not like wind or a small animal, but something big pushing through it. The vines and trees were parting, and I mean violently, like whatever it was didn't care about making noise. I froze, completely froze, for what felt like forever, but was probably only 5 seconds. I just stood there, staring. The brush opened up about 7 feet across, and that's when the smell hit me. Oh God, the smell. It was overwhelming, like dead animal mixed with this heavy, musky odor, like wet fur and rot. It made me nauseous instantly. My stomach turned, and I felt like I was going to vomit. My son must have sensed something, because he stopped laughing and looked at me, his little face confused. Then the terror kicked in. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't see what it was, just a glimpse of something large and dark moving in the shadows, but my brain went straight to bear or boar. I've seen bears before, but this felt different. The way the brush was pushed aside, the sheer force of it, and that smell. It was wrong. I scooped up my son without thinking. He's light, but in that moment, he felt like a weight that was anchoring me to the spot. I held him tight against my chest and I ran. I didn't look back. I just ran, stumbling over roots and rocks, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My son was silent, probably scared by how fast I was moving. I could feel his little heart beating against mine, or maybe it was just my own, hammering away. The whole time, that smell seemed to follow us, clinging to the air. I didn't stop until we reached our campsite. My legs were shaking, and I was sweating even though it was cool out. Back at camp, I didn't waste any time. I threw our stuff into the truck, sleeping bags, tent, everything. I didn't care about folding things neatly. I just wanted to get out of there. My son was clinging to my leg, quiet and wide-eyed. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something coming out of the woods. The smell was still there, faint but present, like it had soaked into my clothes or something. I loaded the truck in maybe 10 minutes flat, then got us both inside and locked the doors. I drove straight to a rented cabin I'd booked in Troutdale, about a half-hour away. The whole drive, I was checking the mirrors, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. My son fell asleep in his car seat, exhausted from the adrenaline, I guess. When we got to the cabin, I carried him inside and put him on the bed. Then I went back out to grab our bags from the truck. That's when I noticed the smell again, stronger this time. It was on my truck, like something had rubbed against it or maybe sprayed it. I don't know. It was that same dead animal musk, so potent it made my eyes water. I quickly wiped down the door handle with a rag, but it didn't help much. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just in my head. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. We stayed in the cabin that night. I didn't sleep much. Every little noise had me jumping. The creak of the floorboards, the wind outside. I kept the lights on and my son close to me. At one point, I thought I heard something moving around outside, but I wrote it off as an animal. The cabin is in a wooded area, so it's not uncommon. But then, Later that night, it happened. I was sitting on the couch trying to calm down when I heard this incredibly loud, shrill scream from behind the cabin. It wasn't human. It was too high-pitched and raw, followed by this gurgling sound, like something choking or drowning. I've never heard anything like it. It froze me in place again, that same fear from the ravine washing over me. My son woke up crying, and I grabbed him, ran to the window and looked out. Under the outside light, I saw it. Standing right where I'd parked my truck earlier was this thing. It was huge, at least 8 feet tall, with matted light brown hair all over its body. It had no neck. Its head seemed to sit directly on its shoulders, and its arms hung down past its knees. It was just standing there, staring right at me. Its eyes were dark, and I felt this wave of pure evil, like it knew me, knew I was watching. I couldn't move for a second, just locked in that gaze. Then I snapped out of it. I shoved my son into the truck, jumped in myself, and started the engine. I didn't look back as I sped away, driving like a maniac until I reached downtown Gresham. I parked under a streetlight and just sat there, shaking for what felt like hours. My son was crying, and I was trying to comfort him, but I was barely holding it together myself. I never went back to that cabin, and I haven't camped in a tent since. Every time I think about it, that smell comes back to me, and I feel that same dread. I don't know what it was, but it felt evil, both times, like it was hunting us or something. I've talked to a park ranger since then, and they said there's no big game in that area, no bears or anything that could explain what I saw. But I know what I saw, and I'll never forget it. Story 6. We drove out there on a Friday afternoon in late spring. I think it was May because the weather was starting to warm up, but the nights were still cool. The air had that fresh, damp smell you only get in the Pacific Northwest, mixed with the scent of pine and wet earth. We found a flat area about 10 feet from the riverbank to set up our tent. A little two-person thing that felt cozy but sturdy. The creek itself was maybe 8 feet wide at that point, shallow enough to see the rocks on the bottom, and the water made this constant, gentle rushing sound that was supposed to be relaxing. My boyfriend built a campfire pit with some stones he gathered, and we got a fire going as the sun started to dip behind the trees. I remember feeling pretty content, sitting on a log we'd dragged over, my hands resting on my growing belly, just watching the flames crackle and listening to the river. We'd been there for a few hours, cooking hot dogs on sticks and talking about stupid stuff, like what we'd name the baby, or if we should get a dog someday. The sky turned this deep purple, and stars began to poke through the canopy of fir and cedar trees. It was one of those moments where everything felt right, you know? Like life was simple and good, but then out of nowhere this smell hit us. It was strong and musky, like an elk in rut. I'd smelled something similar once on a hiking trip with my dad years before, so it kind of registered in the back of my mind. But this was more intense, almost overwhelming, like it was clinging to the air around us. I wrinkled my nose and glanced at my boyfriend. He sniffed a couple times and said, "What is that? Smells like something died nearby." I shrugged, trying to play it cool, but already I felt a little knot forming in my stomach. Pregnant women get sensitive to smells, and this one made me feel queasy, like I needed to move away from it. We tried to ignore it for a bit, but the smell didn't fade. If anything, it got stronger, like it was moving closer. Then we started hearing noises from across the river. At first, it was just rustling in the brush, the kind of sound you'd expect from a squirrel or a bird. But it was persistent, and it seemed to be coming from one specific area, maybe 20 or 30 feet away on the other side. My boyfriend grabbed our flashlight, one of those big, heavy-duty ones with fresh batteries, and shone it over there. The beam cut through the darkness, lighting up the dense undergrowth, but we didn't see anything moving, just shadows and leaves swaying slightly in the breeze. I remember feeling relieved for a second, thinking it was probably just a deer or a raccoon foraging around. We sat back down, but the air felt different now, heavier, like the woods were holding their breath. About 20 minutes later, the rustling started up again, louder this time. Then came this loud crack, like a thick branch snapping in half. It wasn't a small sound. It echoed a little over the river noise, and it made me jump. My heart started pounding in my chest, and I could feel the baby kick, like even they were sensing the tension. I looked at my boyfriend, and his face was tense, his eyes wide. "That wasn't a deer," I whispered, my voice shaky. He nodded slowly, not taking his eyes off the other side of the creek. The flashlight was still in his hand, and he aimed it back over there, sweeping it slowly across the brush. That's when I saw it. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, because the light was bouncing off the leaves and creating weird shadows. But then something moved. A part of the brush pushed aside like a curtain being drawn back, and there it was, a face, staring right at us. It was furry, with dirty white hair that looked matted and rough, not dark, like I'd always imagined Bigfoot would be. The hair was longer around the head, kind of shaggy but sparse around the eyes and nose, so I could see the skin underneath, which was dark and leathery. Its nostrils were wide, like an ape's, and it had this intense, almost human-like quality to it, but not quite. The eyes, oh God, the eyes. They seemed to glow red in the flashlight beam, like two coals burning in the dark. It wasn't a reflection. It was like they were lit from within, and they were fixed on me, unblinking. The thing was huge, maybe 7 feet tall, and it was bent over slightly, peering through the branches like it was curious or something. I could see its shoulders, broad and covered in that same dirty white fur, and it moved the tree limbs aside like they were nothing, just pushing them away with one hand. I froze, completely paralyzed. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt this cold sweat break out all over my body. My hands were trembling, and I had to grip the log I was sitting on to keep from falling over. The smell was stronger than ever now, that musky odor filling my nostrils, making me feel dizzy and sick. I couldn't look away from those red eyes. They felt like they were drilling into me, like it knew I was pregnant or something. I don't know how long we stared at each other, maybe a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. My boyfriend was still shining the light, but he hadn't seen it yet. He was focused on the general area, and he kept saying, "What is it? Do you see something?" in this low, urgent voice. I couldn't speak. All I could do was point, my finger shaking uncontrollably. Finally, he followed my gaze, and I heard him gasp. "Holy shit," he muttered, and the flashlight wavered in his hand. But by then, the thing had already started to move back into the brush, like it was retreating slowly. It didn't run or anything. It just melted back into the shadows, and the branches swung back into place. The red eyes disappeared, but I could still feel them on me, like a weight. That's when the terror really hit. My boyfriend snapped out of it first and yelled, "We gotta go now!" He grabbed my arm, pulling me up from the log. I was still in a daze, my legs feeling like jelly, but adrenaline kicked in. We didn't even think about packing up. We just started throwing sand from the riverbank onto the fire to put it out, our hands moving frantically. The embers hissed and smoked, and the sudden darkness made everything worse. I could hear more noises from across the river, heavy footsteps crunching on leaves, like whatever it was hadn't gone far. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might burst, and I could feel the baby moving again, a series of sharp kicks that made me wince. We left everything, the tent, our sleeping bags, the cooler with our food, just grabbed the car keys and ran toward the path that led back to where we'd parked the car. The woods felt alive around us, every sound amplified. Twigs snapped under our feet, and the wind seemed to whisper through the trees. But I kept expecting to see those red eyes again, to feel that thing chasing us. My boyfriend was ahead of me, holding my hand tightly, pulling me along. I stumbled a couple times, my pregnant belly making it hard to balance, but fear kept me going. The path was narrow and dark, with only the moonlight filtering through the branches to guide us. I remember looking back once, and I swear I saw movement in the trees behind us, something big and shadowy, but I didn't stop to check. We reached the car in what felt like minutes, but it was probably only a couple of 100 yards. My boyfriend fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so badly he dropped them once before he got the door open. We piled into the car, and he started the engine immediately, revving it like he was afraid it wouldn't turn over. He didn't even bother with the headlights at first. He just threw it into reverse and backed out onto the gravel road, tires spinning. Once we were moving, he flipped on the high beams, and the sudden light cut through the forest, illuminating the road ahead. Neither of us spoke for the first few minutes. We just drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, me clutching my stomach and trying to catch my breath. The car smelled like sweat and fear, and I could still taste that musky odor in the back of my throat. After a while, he finally said, "What the hell was that?" His voice was rough, like he'd been screaming. I shook my head, tears starting to well up in my eyes. "I don't know," I whispered, "but it was real. I saw it." He hadn't gotten a clear look, just a glimpse of movement and the general shape. So he kept asking me to describe it again, like he was trying to make sense of it. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face, those red eyes staring right through me. We drove for hours, not stopping until we hit the main highway and found an all-night diner. We sat in the parking lot for a while, just shaking, before we went in and ordered coffee. We didn't talk much. Every time we tried, it felt like we were inviting the memory back, and I'd start trembling again. I remember sipping the hot coffee, my hands wrapped around the mug to stop them from shaking, and feeling this deep, cold fear settle in my bones. The baby was quiet now, like even they knew something was wrong. We never went back for our stuff. A few days later, my boyfriend called the ranger station and made up some story about having to leave in a hurry because of a family emergency, but I don't think they bought it. We didn't report what we saw. Who would believe us? Over the years, I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear, or a trick of the light, or my pregnancy hormones making me imagine things, but I know what I saw. That face, that smell, the way it looked at me. It stuck with me. I've had nightmares about it, especially in the months after my son was born. Sometimes I'll be outside at night and catch a whiff of something musky, and my heart will start racing all over again. My boyfriend and I broke up a couple years later, unrelated reasons, but we never talked about it again after that night. It's like we made an unspoken agreement to bury it, and that's it. I've never told anyone this until now. Writing it down, I can still feel that chill, like it happened yesterday. I don't know what it was, and I don't think I ever will, but I know it was real, and I'll never forget it. Story 7. So, this happened to me a few years ago, and I still get chills thinking about it. I've never really talked about it much because, well, who's going to believe me? But I need to get it out there because it's been eating at me, and maybe someone else has seen something similar. I live just outside Harrison Hot Springs in British Columbia, in this little house surrounded by woods. It's pretty isolated, which I usually love. Quiet, peaceful, you know. But that day it felt anything but peaceful. It was a hot afternoon in late August, one of those days where the heat just sits on you like a heavy blanket. I remember the air was thick and humid, and the sun was beating down, making everything shimmer. I'd been inside most of the day, trying to stay cool. I had the windows open because we don't have air conditioning, and the breeze was the only thing keeping me from melting. I was just puttering around the house, maybe tidying up a bit, not really doing anything important. The kind of day where time drags on, and you're just waiting for evening to come so it cools down a little. I was in the kitchen, thinking about maybe getting a drink of water when I first heard it. At first, it was just a faint rustling sound from outside, like something moving through the bushes. I didn't think much of it. We get deer and raccoons around here all the time, and sometimes bears, though they usually keep their distance. But this sound was different. It was heavier, more deliberate. Not the quick skittery noise a small animal makes, but something bigger, taking its time. I paused what I was doing and listened harder. The rustling kept going, steady and slow, coming from the direction of the blackberry bushes at the edge of my yard. My yard isn't huge, maybe 50 feet from the house to the tree line, and those blackberry bushes are wild, growing thick and tangled along the border. They're full of fruit in the summer, and I usually pick some for jam, but I hadn't gotten around to it yet. The sound was definitely coming from there. I felt a little prick of curiosity, mixed with a touch of unease. I decided to take a look, but I didn't want to go outside right away. Instead, I moved to the living room window, which has a clear view of that part of the yard. The blinds were partly closed, so I carefully nudged one aside just enough to peer out. What I saw made my blood run cold. There, standing right by the blackberry bushes, was this massive creature. I mean huge. It had to be over 9 feet tall, maybe even taller, because it towered over the bushes, which are about 6 feet high themselves. My first thought was that it was a bear, but no bear stands like that. This thing was upright on 2 legs, and it was using its hands to strip berries from the branches. Its back was to me at first, so I couldn't see its face, but I could see its shape clearly. It was broad-shouldered, with a powerful build that made me think of a football player, but scaled up to something unnatural. Its arms were long and muscular, and it moved with a kind of grace that was unsettling, because it shouldn't belong to something that big. I stood there frozen, my hands still on the blind, not daring to move. My heart started hammering in my chest so hard I could feel it in my ears. I was sweating, but not from the heat anymore. This was a cold sweat, the kind that makes your skin clammy. I remember my breath catching in my throat, and I had to consciously remind myself to breathe slowly, quietly, because I was terrified it would hear me. The window was open a crack, and I could hear the faint sounds of it eating, a soft, wet crunching as it bit into the berries, and the rustle of leaves as it pulled them off. Then it turned slightly, and I got a better look at its profile. Its hair was coarse and dark, almost black, but it wasn't uniform like an animal's fur. It was uneven, patchy in places, like it had been through rough terrain or maybe had scars underneath. In some spots, it was matted down, and in others, it stuck out in clumps. The hair covered its whole body, but I could still make out the shape of its muscles underneath, especially in its shoulders and back. Its head was large, with a heavy brow, but I couldn't see its face clearly from that angle. What struck me most was its hands. They were huge, like shovel-sized, but they moved with a human-like dexterity. It would pluck a cluster of berries, bring them to its mouth, and then drop the stems. The fingers were thick and powerful, but they curled around the berries gently, almost delicately. It was so bizarre to see something that massive handling something so small with such care. I kept watching, my mind racing. Part of me was trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was a person in a costume or some kind of prank. But who would be out here in the middle of nowhere dressed like that? And the size was all wrong. No human is that tall and broad. Another part of me was screaming that this was Bigfoot, the thing you hear about in stories, but I'd always dismissed those as myths or hoaxes. Now seeing it right there in my yard, it felt all too real. The disbelief was overwhelming, like my brain couldn't process what my eyes were seeing. I pinched my arm lightly, just to make sure I wasn't dreaming, and the pain was sharp and real. This was happening. The creature kept eating. Seemingly oblivious to me, it would pause every now and then, lifting its head to scan the trees around it. That's when I saw its face more clearly, or what I could see of it. Its eyes were dark and deep-set under that heavy brow, and it had a broad, flat nose. Its mouth was wide, and when it chewed, I could see its jaw working. It didn't look aggressive. It just looked focused, like it was solely intent on those berries. But each time it paused to look around, my fear spiked. What if it saw me? The window was about 20 feet away, and with the blinds partly open, I was afraid any movement or sound might give me away. I held my breath, my muscles tense, every fiber of my being screaming at me to back away. But I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, mesmerized and horrified at the same time. I remember the smells drifting in through the window, the sweet, ripe scent of blackberries mixed with the earthy smell of the forest, and underneath it all, a musky animal odor that I hadn't noticed before. It was pungent, like wet dog but stronger, and it made my nose wrinkle. That smell alone convinced me this wasn't any animal I'd encountered. Bears have a distinct smell, but this was different, more primal. It filled the air, adding to the surrealness of the moment. Time seemed to stretch out. I don't know how long I stood there, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10, but it felt like hours. My legs started to ache from standing still, and my hand on the blind was trembling. I could feel the sweat trickling down my back, and my shirt was sticking to me. I kept thinking, what do I do? Should I try to take a picture? My phone was on the kitchen counter, but I was too scared to move. What if it heard me? What if it came toward the house? The thought made my stomach clench. I've never been so afraid in my life. It wasn't just the fear of being attacked. It was the fear of the unknown, of seeing something that shouldn't exist, and realizing that the world is a lot stranger than I thought. Then something changed. The creature stopped eating abruptly, its head snapping up like it had heard something. It turned its body fully toward the trees, and for a second I thought it was looking right at the window. My heart leaped into my throat, and I swear I stopped breathing, but its gaze swept past, scanning the forest behind it. It seemed cautious, almost wary. Its posture shifted. It went from relaxed to alert in an instant. It took one last berry, popped it into its mouth, and then it turned sharply and started walking away. Not running, just walking, with long, deliberate strides that covered ground quickly. It moved into the trees, and within seconds, it was gone, swallowed up by the shadows of the forest. I stayed at the window for what felt like forever, just staring at the spot where it had disappeared. My body was shaking, and I had to lean against the wall to steady myself. The yard was empty now, but the memory of what I'd seen was burned into my mind. The rustling had stopped, and the only sounds were the normal ones. Birds chirping, the faint buzz of insects, the leaves rustling in the breeze. It was like nothing had happened, but everything had changed. After a few minutes, I forced myself to move. I slowly backed away from the window, my legs wobbly, and sat down on the couch. My mind was racing with questions. What was that? Was it really Bigfoot? Why was it here? I felt a mix of relief that it was gone and a lingering fear that it might come back. I knew I had to check outside to see if there was any evidence, but I was terrified to go out. What if it was still nearby, watching me? I waited maybe half an hour, just sitting there, trying to calm down. My heart rate slowly returned to normal, but the adrenaline was still coursing through me. Eventually, I gathered my courage and decided to go outside. I grabbed a kitchen knife. Not that it would do much against something that size, but it made me feel a little safer, and slowly opened the front door. The heat hit me like a wall, but I barely noticed. I stepped onto the porch, my eyes darting around, scanning the tree line for any movement. Everything seemed quiet. I walked over to the blackberry bushes, my steps cautious. The ground was soft from recent rains, and I could see footprints, but they were muddled and hard to make out. What I did see clearly was the damage to the bushes. Whole sections were stripped bare, with berries gone and stems broken. The branches were bent and twisted, some of them snapped clean off. It looked like something massive had been feeding there. I knelt down to get a closer look, and that's when I saw the handprints, or what I assumed were handprints. In the mud near the base of the bushes, there were impressions that were too large to be human, with long fingers and a broad palm. They were deep, like whatever made them was heavy. I also noticed a few strands of dark hair caught on the thorns, coarse and thick, unlike any animal hair I'd seen. I stood up, my hands shaking as I looked around. The musky smell was still faintly there, lingering in the air. I felt a chill despite the heat. This was real. I hadn't imagined it. The evidence was right in front of me. I took a few photos with my phone of the bent branches, the stripped berries, the handprints, but I knew they wouldn't capture the sheer scale of what I'd seen. I stayed out there for a bit longer, just staring into the trees, half expecting the creature to reappear, but it didn't. The forest was silent, almost too quiet. I went back inside and locked the door, something I don't usually do during the day. I spent the rest of the afternoon jumpy, starting at every little noise. I kept peeking out the window, but I didn't see anything else. As evening fell, the fear slowly settled into a deep unease. I didn't sleep well that night, and for weeks after, I was on edge whenever I was outside. To this day, I don't know what I saw. I've read up on Bigfoot sightings, and some of the descriptions match what I experienced. The size, the hair, the way it moved. But it's one thing to read about it and another to see it with your own eyes. That hot afternoon outside Harrison Hot Springs changed how I see the world. It's not just the familiar, comfortable place I thought it was. There are things out there that we don't understand, things that hide in the shadows. I never saw it again, and part of me is glad, but part of me wonders if it's still out there, watching. I still get that cold feeling when I think about it, and sometimes, when I'm alone in the yard, I catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see those dark eyes staring back at me. Story 8. Okay, so I've never told this to anyone outside my family until now, and even then it took me years to say it out loud. I'm still not sure what I saw that day, but it stuck with me, and I need to get it off my chest. This happened back in the spring, one of those perfect Kansas days where the air is just warm enough and the sky is this clear, endless blue. I remember it was a Saturday because the kids were home from school and they were being extra loud, running around, screaming, the usual chaos. I love them to death, but sometimes you just need a break, you know? So I decided to take a walk alone, just to clear my head. I live in a pretty rural area, not far from this river that cuts through the countryside. There's an old bridge nearby, one of those rusty single-lane deals that's been around forever. It's usually quiet out there, which is why I headed that way. The path to the river is dirt and gravel, lined with tall grass and a few trees. I could hear birds chirping, and the wind was gentle, rustling the leaves. It felt peaceful, exactly what I needed. As I got closer to the riverbank, maybe about 50 yards away, I noticed something squatting near the water's edge. At first, I thought it was a homeless person. We've had a few folks camp out around here from time to time, so it didn't strike me as too weird. But something about the way it was positioned made me pause. It was hunched over, facing away from me, and it was moving in this slow, deliberate way. I stopped walking and just stood there, watching. My heart wasn't racing yet. I was more curious than anything. I took a few steps closer, trying to get a better look without drawing attention. The figure was squatting flat-footed, like how you see gorillas do in documentaries. Knees bent, feet flat on the ground. It was covered in this thick, matted brown hair from head to toe, and it was big, way bigger than a person. I'd say at least 7 feet tall if it stood up, but it was crouched low. Its arms were long and muscular, and it was using its hands to dig into the river mud. That's when I saw what it was doing. It was pulling out clams from the dirty water, breaking them open with its fingers, and eating them raw. My stomach turned. The river isn't clean. It's murky and full of algae, and seeing someone, or something, eating from it like that was disgusting. But then it hit me. This wasn't a person. The hair wasn't clothes or some kind of costume. It was part of it, like fur. And the hands. They looked almost human, but not quite. The fingers were thick and strong, with dirt caked under the nails, and they moved with this weird grace, prying open the shells like it was nothing. I could hear the faint crunching sounds as it bit into the flesh, and a shiver went down my spine. I felt this cold sweat break out on my forehead, and my breathing got shallow. I was frozen in place, torn between wanting to run and this stupid curiosity that kept me rooted. Part of me was screaming to get the hell out of there, but another part was fascinated. I'd heard stories about Bigfoot or whatever, but I always brushed them off as nonsense. Now, standing there, it felt too real. The air around me seemed to get heavier, and the birds had stopped singing. It was dead quiet, except for the rustle of the river and the occasional snap of a clamshell. I remember my legs feeling like jelly, and I had to clench my fists to stop my hands from shaking. I kept thinking, what if it turns around? I didn't want to see its face, but I couldn't look away. Its shoulders were broad, and the hair on its back was tangled with leaves and twigs, like it had been wandering through the woods. It didn't seem aware of me at all, which was both a relief and terrifying. How could something that big not notice me? I was only about 30 feet away now, hiding behind a cluster of bushes. That's when I decided I needed proof. I didn't have my phone on me. I'd left it at home because I wanted to disconnect for a bit. Stupid, I know. But I thought if I could just get back to the house, grab my phone and come back, maybe I could snap a picture or record a video. No one would believe me without evidence, so I started backing away slowly, trying not to make a sound. Every step felt like it took forever. I was hyper-aware of every crunch under my feet, every rustle of my clothes. I made it back to the path without it noticing, I think. Once I was far enough away, I broke into a run. My heart was pounding in my ears, and I could feel the adrenaline surging through me. The walk back to the house felt twice as long as it should have. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see it following me, but there was nothing, just the empty path and the sound of my own ragged breathing. When I got home, the kids were still playing in the yard, and my wife was inside. I didn't say anything to them. I just grabbed my phone from the kitchen counter and headed back out. My wife asked where I was going, and I mumbled something about forgetting something by the river. I didn't want to scare her or have her think I was losing it. By the time I got back to the river, the sun was starting to set. The sky was turning orange and purple, and shadows were stretching across the ground. It was getting cooler, and I wished I'd brought a jacket. I approached the spot slowly, my phone clutched in my hand, ready to record. But when I got there, it was gone. The riverbank was empty. No figure, no clams, nothing. Just the same mud and water as before. I stood there for what felt like ages, scanning the area. My heart sank. Part of me was relieved I didn't have to face it again, but another part was disappointed. I walked over to where it had been squatting and saw indentations in the mud. Large, deep prints that weren't human. They were too big, with a wide shape that didn't match any animal I knew. And there were broken clamshells scattered around, some still wet and glistening in the fading light. I took a few pictures of the prints and the shells, but without the thing itself it felt pointless. Who's going to believe some weird marks in the mud? I stayed there until it was fully dark, the stars coming out and the air getting chilly. I kept hoping it would come back, but it didn't. Eventually, I trudged home, feeling exhausted and shaken. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure squatting by the river, eating those clams. I kept replaying it in my head, wondering what it was. Was it a bear? But bears don't squat like that, and their hands aren't that human-like. Plus, the hair was different, longer, more uniform, and the way it used its fingers, it was too deliberate, too skilled. I never told anyone about it for years. I was afraid people would think I was crazy or making it up. It wasn't until a few months ago, when I saw a TV show about strange sightings in Kansas, Bigfoot encounters actually, that I finally worked up the courage to tell my wife and kids. They were skeptical at first, but when I showed them the pictures I took that day, they could see the prints and the shells, and they knew I wasn't joking. My oldest kid even said he'd heard similar stories from friends. Now, part of me hopes I'll see it again one day, just to know I wasn't imagining things, but most of me is still scared shitless from that afternoon. Every time I walk near that river, I get this uneasy feeling like I'm being watched, and I always bring my phone with me now, just in case, but deep down, I don't think I'll ever fully understand what happened, and that's what messes with me the most. Story 9. It was one of those late September afternoons where the air starts getting that crisp edge to it, the kind that makes you glad you wore a jacket but still lets the sun warm your face through the trees. We'd spent the whole day out at Big Ridge State Park, my mom and dad, my 7-year-old son and me. We'd been fishing at the lake since just after breakfast, the kind of lazy, nothing special family day that you look back on and realize was actually perfect. The kind you take for granted until something happens that makes you never forget a single detail. We were packing up as the sun started to dip behind the ridges, turning the sky this soft orange color. My son was tired but happy, clutching his little fishing rod like a trophy, babbling on about the big one that got away. I was carrying most of the gear, the cooler with our few sad-looking fish, the tackle box, a couple of folding chairs. It was a bit of a load, but it felt good, the kind of tired you earn from a day outside. The trail back from the lake to the main parking lot isn't long, maybe a mile or so, but it winds through some pretty thick woods. It's one of those narrow paths, barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side in most spots, with the trees and undergrowth pressing in on both sides. You can hear the lake for the first part, then it just gets quiet. The kind of quiet where you notice every little sound. My son was walking right beside me, his small hand sometimes brushing against my leg. My parents were maybe 10, 15 feet behind us. I could hear my dad's low, rumbling voice saying something to my mom, and her lighter laugh in response. Everything was normal. I mean, completely, boringly normal. I remember thinking about what I was going to make for dinner when we got home, whether I had any hamburger buns left. Mundane stuff. I turned my head to call back to my parents, just some stupid comment about how we should have quit while we were ahead with the fishing. I didn't even stop walking. I just glanced over my shoulder, my body still facing forward on the trail. The words were half out of my mouth when I turned back to face the path ahead, and it was there. My brain didn't process it right away. It was like my eyes saw it, but my mind just threw up an error message. It was standing on the trail, maybe 20, 25 feet in front of us, just standing there, and it was massive. I'm not talking tall like a basketball player. I'm talking something else entirely. It had to be 8, maybe 9 feet tall. Its head wasn't set on a neck like a person's. It was like its shoulders just went straight up into this conical, almost pointed head that was facing forward, looking down the trail away from us. It was already in motion when I saw it. It was crossing the trail from our left to our right, stepping out of the thicker brush on one side and heading into the woods on the other. Its walk was the weirdest thing. It wasn't a lope or a run. It was this stiff, purposeful stride. Its arms didn't swing loosely like a human's. They swung in a rigid, mechanical pendulum motion, straight and controlled. And its legs. Each step it took covered so much ground, 4 feet, maybe 6. It was just this huge, effortless, ground-eating step. 1, 2, 3 steps, and it was across the narrow trail. The color is burned into my brain. It wasn't just black. It was a black base, but mixed through with this coarse brownish hair, like an old weather-beaten buffalo hide. The late afternoon sun, filtering through the canopy, caught the brown bits and made them look almost reddish in places. The hair was long, shaggy, and looked matted, especially around its legs and the backs of its arms. The silence was absolute. Its feet, whatever they were, made no sound on the packed earth of the trail. No crunch of leaves, no snap of a twig. Nothing. Just this silent, monstrous movement. The whole thing lasted maybe 3 seconds, from the moment I turned my head and saw it, to the moment it took that third step and vanished into the wall of rhododendrons and oak trees on the other side of the path. It didn't look at us. It didn't pause. It didn't make a sound. It just crossed. My breath just left my body. It wasn't a scream. It was this sharp, involuntary gasp, like I'd been punched in the gut. All the air went out of me. My heart didn't just start racing. It felt like it seized up completely for a second, a hard, painful knot in my chest, and then it exploded into this frantic, hammering rhythm that I could feel in my throat, my temples, my fingertips. My son was still walking, looking down at the path, completely oblivious. I threw my arm out, the one not holding the cooler, and shoved him behind me. It wasn't a gentle move. I practically pushed him off his feet. I didn't think. It was pure instinct. Get him behind me. Put my body between him and that thing. My parents caught up to us. "What's wrong?" my mum asked, her voice tinged with that immediate mom worry. "You okay?" I couldn't speak. I just stood there, rooted to the spot, staring at the empty space on the trail where it had been. My arm was still out, holding my son back. I could feel him squirming, confused. I finally managed to force a word out. It was choked, strangled. "Did you see that?" I whispered. It was all I could manage. "See what, honey?" my dad said, peering ahead. "A bear?" I shook my head, my eyes still glued to the spot. The image was seared onto my retinas, the sheer size of it, the way it moved, the utter silence. I think I just saw Bigfoot. The words sounded insane coming out of my mouth. I felt crazy even saying them. My dad let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Oh, for Christ's sake, it was probably just a big shadow, or a bear standing up." "It wasn't a bear," I said, and my voice was stronger now, edged with a panic I couldn't control. "It wasn't a bear, Dad. It walked across the trail, right there." I pointed a trembling finger. "It was huge, and it walked." It didn't walk right. My mom came up beside me, her hand on my arm. "You're white as a sheet." She looked from me to the empty trail and back. "What did you see, really?" I tried to describe it, the height, the lack of a neck, the stiff, swinging arms, the incredible length of its stride, the shaggy black and brown hair. As I talked, the reality of it started to sink in deeper, and a cold dread, different from the initial shock, began to spread through me. This wasn't a fleeting shadow, this was a solid, physical thing, a living thing. We all stood there for a minute, just staring into the woods where it had disappeared. The bushes weren't even moving. There was no sound of anything crashing away. It had just been absorbed by the forest. The woods, which had felt so peaceful and familiar just minutes before, now felt like a completely different place. Every shadow between the trees seemed to hold a new shape. Every rustle of a leaf, which I would have dismissed as a squirrel or a bird before, now sounded deliberate, menacing. The light was fading fast. The orange was draining from the sky, replaced by a deep, cool blue. The shadows were lengthening, merging together into one big pool of darkness under the trees. We should go look for tracks," my dad said, but his voice lacked its usual authority. He sounded uncertain. I looked down at my son, who was now clinging to my leg, picking up on the fear radiating from all of us. I looked at the darkening woods. A primal part of my brain, the part that isn't civilized or curious, was screaming one word. "Go!" "No," I said, and my voice was firm, final. "We're not going over there. It's getting dark. We need to get to the car now." I didn't wait for an argument. I shifted the cooler to my other hand, grabbed my son's hand tightly, and started walking, pulling him along. My pace was quick, almost a fast walk. My parents, after a moment's hesitation, fell in behind me. The casual, leisurely stroll was over. The rest of that walk to the parking lot was the longest of my life. I was hyper-aware of everything. Every sound was amplified. The crunch of our own footsteps sounded like gunshots. I kept my eyes glued to the trail ahead, but my peripheral vision was screaming, scanning the tree line on both sides constantly. I expected to see it again at any moment. I expected to see it standing just inside the tree line, watching us, or worse, stepping back out onto the trail in front of us. I kept my son right next to me, my grip on his hand so tight I probably hurt him. I didn't let him lag behind for a second. I was in a state of pure, unadulterated vigilance. My neck and shoulders were so tense they ached. My heart was still pounding, a steady, frantic drumbeat of fear. We didn't talk. The only sounds were our footsteps and our breathing. The normal forest sounds, the birds, the crickets, seemed to have gone quiet too, or maybe I just couldn't hear them over the blood roaring in my ears. When we finally broke out of the trees and saw the gravel parking lot and our car, it was like surfacing from a deep, dark lake. The sight of that familiar, beat-up SUV was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. We practically ran the last 50 feet. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the lock. I yanked open the door, shoved my son into the back seat, and tossed the gear in after him. My parents piled into the front. I slammed the door and hit the lock button. The solid thunk, a small, pathetic shield against what was out there. I sat there for a second, both hands gripping the steering wheel, just trying to breathe. I looked back at the trailhead. It was just a dark gap in the wall of trees now, an empty, dark mouth. But it didn't feel empty. We drove out of there in silence. No one said a word for the first 10 minutes. It was only when we were on the main highway, surrounded by the normalcy of other cars and streetlights, that my mom finally spoke. "What do you think it really was?" she asked, her voice quiet. I just shook my head. I didn't have an answer. I still don't. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head. A person in a suit out here, in the middle of nowhere, moving like that? No. A bear? Absolutely not. I've seen bears. They don't stand like that. They don't walk with that stiff, purposeful, silent gait. They don't have that shape. It was something else, something that shouldn't exist. But I saw it. For 3 heartbeats, I saw it as clearly as I see this screen right now. It was real. It was physical, and it was so far outside of anything I understood that it shattered my sense of reality in a way I can't even properly explain. The terror wasn't just in seeing it. The terror is in the knowing that thing is out there, knowing the woods aren't as empty as you thought, knowing that you can be walking on a familiar trail on a perfect afternoon, thinking about hamburger buns, and in the space of a single glance, your whole world can tilt on its axis and never quite right itself again. I haven't been back to Big Ridge since. My son asked to go fishing again a few weeks ago, and I made up some excuse I couldn't do it. I look at the woods behind my own house differently now. I listen to the sounds of the night differently. It was there. It moved. It was real. And that's a fact I have to live with for the rest of my life. Story 10. It was one of those perfect late summer days, the kind that makes you forget about everything else. The 17th of September, 2014. I remember the date because I wrote it on the permit. I'd taken the day off from my job at the auto parts store to go out to the family land. My granddad left us a good chunk of property way out in the hills, and it's where I go to just be, to get away from the noise. That day, I was specifically after ginseng. It was the right time of year for it, and if you know where to look, you can find some good, mature roots that'll bring a decent price. It's not about the money, really. It's the hunt, the quiet focus of it. I'd been out since just after sunup, my old canvas bag over my shoulder, a walking stick in my hand to poke through the leaf litter. The air was cool and carried that damp, earthy smell of the woods waking up. I'd worked my way along a familiar ridge, checking all the usual spots, and had managed to dig a few nice 4-prongers. By mid-afternoon I was tired, but feeling good. My back ached from all the bending, and my knees were complaining, so I decided to take a break. I came to a spot I know well, a high point where the trees thin out, and you can look down into a wide, open meadow. It's maybe the size of a couple football fields, just this sea of tall golden grass swaying in the breeze. Cutting through the middle of it is a deep, washed-out ditch, probably 10 feet across and 6 feet deep in places, a scar from runoff during heavy rains. On the far side, the woods get thick and dark again, a solid wall of oak and hickory. I sat down with my back against a big old pine, its bark rough through my flannel shirt. I took a long drink of water from my canteen and just watched the meadow. It was peaceful, quiet. The only sounds were the buzz of insects and the occasional call of a crow in the distance. I remember feeling completely alone in the best way possible. That's when the first sound hit me. It wasn't a normal sound. It wasn't a deer bounding away or a turkey flapping. This was a heavy, deliberate crashing. Like something big wasn't just moving through the underbrush, but was plowing through it, not caring about stealth. The sound was coming from the far tree line, the dark side of the meadow. It was so loud and out of place that my whole body went stiff. I stopped breathing, my canteen frozen halfway to my lips. I stared hard at the edge of the woods, my eyes straining to pick out a shape, a movement, anything. The crashing stopped for a second and then started again, even closer to the tree line. My heart was starting to thump against my ribs, a dull, rapid beat. I thought, bear. It had to be a bear, a big one, maybe a male that had been spooked, but it sounded heavier, more purposeful. Then it stepped out of the shadows. My brain short-circuited. It just stopped working for a second because what I was seeing didn't make any sense. It was a large black figure, and it was moving on all fours. It was massive, the size of a damn grizzly, but its shape was all wrong. The legs were too long, the arms were too, and it moved with a strange, lumbering grace that was nothing like a bear's rolling gait. It was coming out of the trees and into the tall grass at the edge of the meadow, heading toward the ditch. I was glued to the tree, my fingers digging into the dirt beside me. I couldn't have moved if I wanted to. I just watched, my mind screaming one word over and over. What? What is that? It reached the ditch and paused at the edge, and then it stood up. I think a part of me knew it was going to, but the reality of it it stole the air from my lungs. It rose from that crouch, unfolding itself upward in one smooth, powerful motion. It was like watching a building stand up. It was just so impossibly tall. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing made me feel like a child. It had to be 9 feet tall, maybe more. Its shoulders were unbelievably broad, I'd guess 4 feet across, just this huge shelf of muscle and darkness. It was covered in shaggy black hair that looked almost wet in the afternoon sun. But the most terrifying part, the thing that really locked the fear in place, was its utter stillness once it was upright. It didn't look around. It didn't sniff the air. It just stood there, facing across the meadow away from me. Its arms, which were long and thick, hung down at its sides, and its hands, I couldn't see fingers, just these dark, heavy-looking hands, came to rest on top of the buckbrush that grows along the ditch. That's another detail that's burned into my mind. That buckbrush is tall stuff. It grows well over a man's head. 14 feet, easy. And this thing's hands were resting on the top of it, its arms just slightly bent. The sheer scale of that, the math of it that my brain was desperately trying and failing to do, made me feel dizzy. It just stood there for 5 minutes. I know it was 5 minutes because I was staring at my watch, at the little second hand ticking its way around the dial, too scared to even look away from it for more than a second. 5 full minutes, and the whole time it was swaying. Just a slight, gentle sway, side to side, like a tree in a very soft breeze. It was a slow, rhythmic motion that was utterly hypnotic and deeply, deeply wrong. There was no wind. The air was dead calm. The grass in the meadow wasn't moving, but this thing was swaying. My whole body was trembling. It was a fine, uncontrollable shake, like I was freezing cold, but sweat was pouring down my back and beading on my forehead. I could feel the rough bark of the pine tree pressing into my spine, and I remember thinking stupidly that I was glad I'd worn a thick shirt. My mouth was so dry it felt like it was full of cotton. I tried to swallow and couldn't. My legs were numb from sitting, but I was too terrified to shift my weight even an inch. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to be small, to be quiet, to not be seen. I kept thinking, what is it doing? What is it waiting for? It was just this immense silent statue that happened to be swaying. It was looking out over the meadow, and I was looking at its profile. I never got a clear look at its face. It was just a dark shape under the mass of hair on its head, but I could feel its presence, a physical pressure in the air. It felt ancient. It felt like it didn't belong in my world, or I didn't belong in its. Then, after what felt like an hour, it moved. It didn't turn its head. It didn't make a sound. It just lowered its arms. They dropped from the tops of the buckbrush and hung by its sides again. Then it bent its knees, and its massive upper body tilted forward, and it settled back into that hunched-over, all-fours position. The movement was fluid and silent. There was no grunt of effort, no cracking of twigs. It was like watching a shadow change shape. It turned, still on all fours, and began to move back toward the tree line it had come from. It didn't crash this time. It moved away with a quiet, fluid speed that was even more unnerving than the noise had been. It was just a dark shape gliding through the tall grass, which barely seemed to rustle as it passed. It was headed for the ditch, and I lost sight of it for a second as it dipped down into the gully. My eyes were fixed on the spot where it had disappeared. I didn't blink. I was waiting for it to reappear on the other side, to cross the ditch and melt back into the dark woods. I held my breath, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. It never came out. I stared at that spot for what felt like another 5 minutes, my eyes straining, expecting at any second to see that huge black form emerge from the ditch, but nothing happened. The meadow was empty. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the frantic thumping in my chest. The insects had even gone quiet. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself up from the base of the tree. My legs were screaming pins and needles, and I had to grab the trunk to keep from falling over. I stood there, leaning against the pine, staring across the meadow at the empty ditch, at the silent tree line. Nothing. It was just gone. It had vanished in the space of a few seconds, in a ditch that wasn't nearly deep enough to hide something that tall. It made no sense. It defied physics. The awe hit me then, a cold wave that washed over the terror. It wasn't a good feeling. It was a deep, hollow feeling of my understanding of the world just cracking apart. I stood there for a long time, maybe 20 minutes, just watching, waiting for some sign that I hadn't lost my mind. But there was nothing. The woods were just woods again. The meadow was just a meadow. I finally forced myself to move. I left my ginseng bag, my walking stick, everything right where it was. I didn't care. I turned and I half walked, half ran back the way I had come, my body shaking, my head on a swivel, expecting to see it behind every tree. The 2-mile hike back to my truck felt like a marathon. Every snap of a twig made me jump. Every shadow seemed to move. I got to my truck, fumbled the keys, and locked the doors as soon as I was inside. I just sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I drove home in a daze. I didn't tell my wife that night. I didn't tell anyone for a long time. How do you even start that conversation? I went back a week later, in the middle of the day, with 2 of my cousins. I had to get my stuff. We found my bag and my stick right where I'd left them. We went to the spot by the pine tree. The meadow looked exactly the same. Peaceful, normal. We walked down to the ditch. There were no tracks, no broken branches, nothing. It was like it had never been there at all. But I know what I saw. I can still see it when I close my eyes. That immense black figure standing in the quiet afternoon, its hands resting on the 14-foot brush, swaying slightly back and forth for 5 minutes, like it was listening to music only it could hear. I can still feel the terror and the awe and the complete world-shattering confusion. I don't know what it was. I don't have a name for it. I just know that on the 17th of September, 2014, I was not alone in those woods, and the thing that was with me was something I will never, ever be able to explain. Story 11. It was one of those late November mornings in Ohio where the cold doesn't just nip at you, it sinks right into your bones. I remember the exact date because it was the last day of deer season, a Tuesday. I'd been out since before sunrise, the kind of dark where you can't see your own hand in front of your face, just trusting your feet to know the trail. My usual spot is way back in the Zaleski State Forest, a good 2-hour hike from where I park my truck. It's quiet back there, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like a blanket. Most people don't bother going that deep. Nothing was moving. I hadn't seen a single deer, not even a squirrel, which was weird. Usually you at least hear things rustling, but that day it was just silent. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I'd been sitting in my stand for hours. My butt was numb from the cold metal seat, and my thermos of coffee was long gone. I figured I'd call it a day, maybe get back home in time for a late lunch. It was probably around 11 in the morning. So I packed up my gear, climbed down, and started heading back down the main trail. It's an old logging road, mostly grown over, but it's the straightest shot back. The sun was out, but it was weak, not doing much to warm anything up. I was just trudging along, thinking about nothing in particular, just putting one foot in front of the other, my rifle slung over my shoulder. My mind was on a hot shower and a sandwich. That's when I saw it. It was just a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, off to the right of the trail. I stopped dead. My first thought was, finally, a deer. I slowly turned my head, my hand going to the strap of my rifle. But it wasn't a deer. Something stepped off the trail about 50 yards ahead of me and moved into the trees. It was big, too big, and it walked on 2 legs. It was just a glimpse, a dark, upright shape that disappeared into the thicket of bare trees and evergreen firs. My brain short-circuited. A bear? But bears around here don't walk that straight, and they're usually smaller, and besides, they should be hibernating. This was different. My heart, which had been beating slow and steady from the walk, just kicked into a whole new gear. Thump, thump, thump against my ribs, so hard I could feel it in my throat. Every instinct was screaming at me to run, but my feet were glued to the ground. Curiosity, or maybe just pure dumb shock, kept me there. I had to know what I'd just seen. I had to be sure. I unslung my rifle, holding it tight, the cold wood of the stock a familiar comfort against my cheek. I started walking forward, slow, each step deliberate and quiet. The crunch of my boots on the frozen leaves sounded like gunshots in that silence. I got to the spot where it had stepped off the trail. The ground was soft there, a patch of mud not quite frozen. And there was a print. It wasn't a boot print. It wasn't a bear print. It was long, really long and wide. It looked almost human, but stretched out, and the toes, they seemed splayed. The sight of it sent a fresh jolt of ice water straight down my spine. This was wrong. All of this was wrong. I looked up from the print, my eyes scanning the trees, and that's when I saw it. It hadn't gone far. It was standing maybe 40 yards away, just beyond a fallen log, half hidden by a cluster of pine trees. It was just standing there, perfectly still, and it was looking right at me. I've never felt a fear like that. It's not like being scared of a snake or even a bear. This was a deep, primal, gut-level terror, the kind that empties your head of all thought and just leaves this cold, screaming void. The creature was massive, 7 feet tall, easy, maybe 8. It was covered in dark, shaggy hair like a wet dog, but it was built thick, with huge shoulders and a powerful chest. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees, but its face, that's what I'll never forget. It wasn't an ape face, it wasn't a man's face. It was something in between. The brow was heavy, but underneath, its eyes, they were big and brown. I know that sounds crazy, but they were. They weren't black or soulless. They were intelligent. They were locked onto me with an intensity that felt physical, like a weight pressing against my chest. It was studying me, the same way I was studying it. For a long moment, neither of us moved. I couldn't have moved if I'd wanted to. I was paralyzed. My fingers were clenched so tight around my rifle that they ached. I remember thinking, very clearly, this is it. It's going to charge. It's going to cross that distance in 2 seconds flat, and that will be the end of me. I could almost feel the impact, see it happening, the sheer size of it, the power in its frame. My rifle felt like a toy. A .30-06 might drop a deer, but against that, I wasn't so sure. The fear won. I broke. I couldn't stand there anymore. I slowly, carefully started to back away, my eyes never leaving it. I took one step, then another. The creature didn't react. It just kept staring, then it opened its mouth. The sound that came out wasn't a roar, it wasn't a growl. It was a screeching howl, high-pitched and deafeningly loud. It cut through the quiet forest and shattered it. It was a sound that shouldn't come from a living thing, full of rage and power and something else, something ancient. The noise hit me like a physical blow. It stopped me in my tracks, my whole body seizing up. My heart wasn't just pounding now, it was a frantic, wild thing trying to beat its way out of my chest. My ears were ringing from the volume of it. When the sound finally faded, the silence that rushed back in felt even heavier than before. I forced myself to look back at it. It had moved. It was closer. A lot closer. 20 feet away at most. It was just standing there on the other side of the fallen log. I hadn't heard it move, not a single twig snap, not a leaf rustle. How does something that big move so quietly? The proximity was suffocating. I could smell it now, a musky, earthy smell like wet fur and old leaves, and something wild, something I'd never smelled before. I could see the individual strands of hair on its body, dark and matted. I could see the texture of its skin around its eyes and mouth. My mind was racing, a jumble of panic and half-formed thoughts. Don't show fear. That's what they say about predators, right? But I am fear. I am made of fear. The rifle in my hands felt like the most dangerous thing in the world. Pointing it would be a challenge, a threat. And I knew with a certainty that was as solid as the ground beneath my feet, that if I threatened it, I would not be walking out of these woods. I had to do something. I had to show it. I wasn't a threat, moving slower than I have ever moved in my life. I bent my knees, keeping my eyes locked on its big brown ones. I didn't look away, not for a second. I laid my rifle down on the bed of leaves. I did it gently, carefully, like I was handling a baby. I straightened back up, holding my empty hands out to my sides, palms open. I was shaking so bad I was surprised I could stand. My breath was coming in shallow, ragged gasps that clouded in the cold air between us. It watched me the entire time, its head tilted just a fraction, as if it was processing what I'd just done. The intelligence in its gaze was unnerving. This wasn't just an animal. It was thinking. It was making a decision. Then it stepped over the log. I flinched. I couldn't help it. I thought for sure that was it. But it didn't charge. It took one slow, deliberate step toward me, then it stopped. It was now maybe 15 feet away. I could see the rise and fall of its chest as it breathed. I could see the way its muscles shifted under that thick coat. It was so close, I could have thrown a rock and hit it. We stood like that for what felt like an hour. It was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. It just stood there, completely still, those big brown eyes looking right into me. It felt like it was looking past my eyes, past my skin and bones, right down into the core of me, into all that terror. And in that moment, the fear didn't go away, but it changed. It wasn't just the fear of being killed. It was the fear of the unknown, The sheer, staggering reality of what was standing in front of me. This thing, this creature from campfire stories and blurry videos was real. And it was right here. Then it blinked, slowly. It turned its head, looking off into the woods to my left, and then it just turned. It turned its massive body away from me and started walking. Not running, walking. It moved with a strange, fluid grace, its long arms swinging slightly. It walked back into the trees, its form quickly getting swallowed up by the shadows and the undergrowth. The second it was out of sight, the spell broke. A huge, shuddering gasp racked my body, and I doubled over, my hands on my knees, sucking in huge lungfuls of the cold air. I was trembling all over, my legs like jelly. I stayed like that for a minute, just trying to get my breathing under control, trying to convince my body that the immediate danger was past. My rifle was still on the ground. I stared at it, picking it up, felt like admitting this was all real, but I couldn't leave it. I snatched it up, the familiar weight feeling alien and dangerous now. And then, I don't know why I did it. Maybe I needed proof. Maybe I was still in shock. But I started to follow it. I moved off the trail, heading in the direction it had gone. I walked carefully, quietly, my senses on high alert. I could still smell that musky odor in the air, a trail I could follow. I hadn't gone more than 30 yards when I saw it again. A dark shape moving between the trees, maybe 100 yards ahead. It was walking, same steady pace. It knew I was there, I'm sure of it. It stopped and turned its head, looking back over its shoulder right at me. Even from that distance, I could feel its gaze. Then it broke into a run. I've never seen anything move that fast. It wasn't a clumsy, loping run. It was powerful, explosive. It covered ground in huge, bounding strides, weaving through the trees like they weren't even there. It was a blur of dark motion, and in seconds, it was gone. Completely gone. The sound of its movement was just a brief rustle, and then nothing. The forest was silent again. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the empty space where it had been. The cold started to seep back in, the normal cold of a November day, but it couldn't touch the deeper cold that had settled inside me. I looked down at my hands. They were still shaking. I finally turned around and started walking back to the trail. I didn't run. I just walked. My mind was completely blank, wiped clean by the experience. I found my way back to the logging road and started the long hike back to my truck. The whole way, I kept expecting to hear that screeching howl again, to see it step out in front of me, but nothing happened. I got to my truck, fumbled with the keys, and finally got the door open. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, just staring through the windshield at the line of trees. I could still smell that musky scent on my clothes. I never told my family. I never told my friends. What would I say? I saw Bigfoot, and we had a staring contest, and I gave up my gun, and it just walked away. They'd think I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had, but I know what I saw. I know how tall it was. I know the color of its eyes. I know the sound of its howl, a sound that still wakes me up sometimes in the middle of the night, my heart hammering in the dark. I know the feeling of its gaze, a physical pressure that pinned me to the spot. I know that it was real. I haven't been back to that part of the forest since. I still hunt, but I stick to the edges now. Places where I can see open fields. Places that don't feel so heavy with silence. I keep my rifle close, but I don't know what good it would do. That day, it wasn't the rifle that kept me safe. It was laying it down, and I still don't know why it let me go. Sind Story 12. It was one of those hot, sticky afternoons in June of 1978, the kind where the air feels thick and heavy, like you're breathing through a wet blanket. Me, my brother, and my friend, we were all around 12 or 13 at the time, had nothing better to do, so we decided to head out to the old abandoned railroad tracks on the edge of Barnwell County. We lived in a rural part of South Carolina, where fields and woods stretched out for miles, and that railroad, had been out of use for as long as I could remember. The tracks were rusted and overgrown with weeds, and the ties were splintered and soft from years of rain and sun. It was our spot, a place where we could mess around without any adults bothering us. That day, we'd been throwing rocks at tin cans we'd set up on the rails, seeing who could knock them off from the farthest distance. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows through the pine trees that lined the area. I remember the smell of pine sap and dry earth, and the way the heat made my shirt stick to my back. My brother was winning, as usual. He always had a better aim, and my friend was joking about how we should sneak into the swamp later to look for frogs. It was all normal kid stuff, the kind of lazy summer day that blends into the next, without anything special happening. But then everything changed. It started with a sound. At first it was faint, like a distant bird call, but it quickly grew louder and sharper. This high-pitched screeching noise cut through the air, so piercing it made the hairs on my arms stand up. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before, not a bird, not an animal I knew, and definitely not a person. It sounded almost electronic, but twisted and raw, like metal scraping against metal, but with a living, breathing quality to it that set my teeth on edge. We all froze mid-throw, rocks still in our hands, and looked at each other. My brother's eyes were wide, and my friend had this nervous grin, like he thought it might be a prank. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice coming out shaky. We were all standing there listening, and the noise came again, closer this time. It echoed through the trees, making the leaves rustle like something was moving through them. Curiosity got the better of us. Kids are stupid that way, always wanting to see what's behind the curtain. We dropped our rocks and started creeping toward the sound, moving slowly along the railroad ties, our sneakers crunching on the gravel. The tracks curved ahead into a denser part of the woods, where the swamp began to seep into the land, and that's where the noise seemed to be coming from. The air grew damper as we got closer, and that musty odor hit us, a thick, earthy smell like rotting leaves and stagnant water. It was strong, almost overwhelming, and it made my nose wrinkle. We were whispering to each other, trying to guess what it could be. Maybe a hurt animal, or some kind of machinery left out here. But deep down, I felt a knot tightening in my stomach. Something felt off. The woods were too quiet now. Even the insects had stopped chirping, like they were holding their breath. We rounded the bend, and that's when we saw it. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was looking at. It was standing maybe 30 feet away, partly hidden by a cluster of pine trees and thick underbrush, but it was tall, so tall it made me feel small. I'd say it was around 7 feet high, maybe more, with this massive, hairy body covered in dark brown fur that looked matted and dirty. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees, and they swung slightly as it moved, like it was just as surprised to see us as we were to see it. But the face, that's what stuck with me. It wasn't like a bear or a monkey. It was more human-like, with a broad nose and deep-set eyes that seemed to lock onto ours. The skin around its face was darker, almost leathery, and it had this expression that wasn't angry or aggressive, just startled, like we'd interrupted something private. We all stopped dead in our tracks, for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 15 seconds. We just stared at each other. Time seemed to slow down. I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears, a loud, frantic rhythm that drowned out everything else. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt cold sweat trickle down my back despite the heat. The musty smell was stronger here, mixed with something else, a musky animal scent that made my stomach churn. I remember thinking, this can't be real. This has to be a dream. But it wasn't. The creature didn't move, it just stood there, its chest rising and falling slowly, and its eyes, dark, intelligent eyes, never left ours. There was no sound now, not even the screeching, just this heavy, oppressive silence that pressed in on us from all sides. My brother was beside me, and I could feel him trembling. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw his hand clench into a fist, but he didn't say anything. My friend had taken a step back, his face pale, and I knew he was about to bolt, but we were all frozen, rooted to the spot by this sheer primal fear. It was like every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. I kept staring at the creature, taking in details I wish I could forget. The way its fur shifted in the slight breeze, the way its fingers, long and thick, curled at its sides, and how its shoulders were hunched like it was ready to spring or retreat. It didn't make any threatening moves, but the sheer size of it, the unnaturalness, sent chills down my spine. This wasn't something from a book or a movie. This was real, standing right in front of us in the fading light of a South Carolina evening. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the spell broke. The creature let out a low, guttural sound, not loud, but deep enough to vibrate through the ground. That's when my friend screamed. A short, sharp cry that snapped us out of it. We turned and ran, not looking back, not caring about anything except getting away. I don't think I've ever run that fast in my life. My legs pumped, my lungs burned, and the world blurred around me. I could hear my brother and friend right behind me, their footsteps pounding on the dirt, and the sound of branches snapping as we crashed through the undergrowth. We didn't stop until we burst out of the woods and onto the road that led to our houses, our chests heaving, tears streaming down our faces. We didn't talk about it on the way home. What was there to say? We just ran straight to my house, slammed the door behind us, and collapsed on the floor, gasping for air. My mom asked what was wrong, but we couldn't form the words. How do you explain something like that? We just said we saw a bear or something, but she knew we were lying. Our fear was too raw, too real. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face, those eyes, and that musty smell seemed to linger in my nostrils. It's been years since then, but I've never forgotten it. The image is etched in my mind, clear as day, and sometimes on quiet nights, I still get that same chill, wondering what it was we saw out there by those old railroad tracks. I'll never know for sure, and that's what haunts me the most. Story 13. It was just another Tuesday, the kind of day that bleeds into the next, without you even noticing. I'd clocked out at 5 on the dot, the way I always do, and the only thing on my mind was getting home, kicking off my shoes, and maybe zoning out in front of the TV for a few hours before it was time to do it all over again. My drive home is usually the most peaceful part of my day. I take Highway 70 north through Hawkins County. It's a pretty drive, especially in the fall, but even in the late spring like it was then, it's just normal. It's my normal. This particular Tuesday, everything was exactly as it should be. I was in my sedan, a boring four-door that's never given me a lick of trouble. The air conditioning was humming, fighting off the muggy Tennessee evening. I had the radio on low, just some background noise, not even really listening to it. I was somewhere between Riseford and Rogersville, a stretch I've driven probably 1,000 times. The road there is narrow, winding a bit with the hills, and there are no shoulders to speak of. It's just asphalt, then a steep wooded embankment going up on one side and down on the other. You don't really think about it, it's just the road. I was doing about 45, taking it easy. The sun was getting low, casting long, deep shadows through the trees, but it was still full daylight. I remember glancing at the clock on my dash. It was just after 6. I remember that specifically because I was thinking I might make it home in time to catch the start of the ball game. Then it happened. Something huge and black just darted out of the woods on my right. It came down the embankment and bolted across the road in front of me, heading west. It wasn't a blur. I saw it clearly, but my brain just stalled. It couldn't process what it was seeing. My body reacted before my mind did. I slammed my foot on the brake pedal, jamming it down into the floorboard. The tires screamed, and I felt the car shudder, skidding forward. My seatbelt locked up and dug into my shoulder. At the exact same second, my briefcase, which I'd tossed on the passenger seat, slid off and hit the floor with a loud thump. Papers spilling out. I didn't care. I didn't even look at it. My eyes were locked on the thing, and in that exact moment, another set of headlights crested the hill coming towards me. His high beams were on, and they hit the creature full on, illuminating it like it was on a stage. It was tall, so damn tall. I'm 6 feet even, and this thing had to be at least 6'3", maybe more. It was lean but not skinny. It was built, powerful through the shoulders and chest, like a wrestler, and it was covered, and I mean completely covered, in long, shaggy black hair. The headlights made that hair shine, and I could see it moving, rippling, not like fur on a dog, but like long grass in a strong wind as it ran. It was running on 2 legs. 2 legs. Its arms were pumping, and the speed was just impossible. It took 2, maybe 3 massive strides, and it was across both lanes and up the other embankment, vanishing into the thick trees like it had never been there. The whole thing lasted 3 seconds, 4 tops. My heart wasn't just beating fast, it was trying to hammer its way out of my chest. I could feel it in my throat, a hard, painful pounding. My hands were clamped on the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I couldn't move. I just sat there, stopped dead in my lane, engine running, staring at the empty space where it had been. The smell of burnt rubber from my tires filled the car. Then I looked at the other vehicle. It was a big, dark-colored pickup truck, and it had also skidded to a stop right opposite me in the southbound lane. We were just sitting there, 2 strangers in the middle of the road, facing each other. I could see the driver, a guy with a baseball cap, and I could see his face. He was staring right at me, and his mouth was hanging open. He looked just as shocked as I felt. He was the one who moved first. He cranked his window down, his movements slow, like he was in a daze. I fumbled for my own window button, my fingers trembling so badly I hit the door lock twice before I found it. The window whirred down and the humid evening air washed in. We just looked at each other for a second. Then he said, "You saw that, right?" His voice was shaky, thin. "Yeah," I managed to croak out. My own voice didn't sound like mine. "Yeah, I saw it. What the hell was that?" he asked. And it wasn't a question you answer, it was just a thing you say when your world just got turned upside down. "I don't know," I said. And I truly didn't. My mind was throwing out words, bear, man in a suit, and discarding them just as fast. It wasn't a bear. Bears don't run like that. They don't stand that tall. A man? No. No way. The proportions were wrong. The speed was wrong. The way it moved was just alien. I heard other voices from his truck. "Did you see that, Dad?" A younger voice, high with panic. What was it? The driver, the dad, just shook his head at them, never taking his eyes off me. "We all saw it," he said to me, confirming it. It wasn't just me. It wasn't a trick of the light. There were multiple witnesses right here, right now. We should look," I said, though every cell in my body was screaming at me to just drive away. He nodded, a quick, jerky motion. "Yeah, okay." We didn't get out. I think we were both too scared to open our doors. I put my car in park and left it running. I flipped my high beams on, aiming them up the embankment where the thing had disappeared. He did the same with his truck. Our pools of light merged, cutting into the deepening shadows under the trees. We scanned the woods. The leaves were thick, a wall of green and black. We saw nothing, no movement, no glowing eyes, no sound. It was just quiet, normal woods. It was like the forest had just swallowed it whole and closed back up like nothing happened. The silence was worse than the sight of it. The absence was terrifying. We sat like that for maybe a minute, just shining our lights, saying nothing. Then from behind me, I saw another set of headlights approaching. A car was coming up behind me, and I was still stopped dead in the road. "Shit," I muttered. The guy in the truck saw it too. "We gotta go," he said, his voice urgent now. There was so much more I wanted to say, to ask, who are you, what do we do? But there was no time. He gave me one last look, a look of pure, shared understanding and terror, and then he rolled his window up. I did the same. I put my car in drive, my foot shaking on the brake, and pulled forward slowly. He drove off south, and I continued north. The rest of the drive home is a blur. I kept checking my rearview mirror, expecting to see that tall, dark shape loping behind my car. Every shadow between the trees looked like it was moving. My whole body was buzzing with adrenaline, a shaky, nauseous feeling that made it hard to breathe. I couldn't get the image out of my head, the way it ran, the sheer, raw power in its movement, the way its hair flowed in the wind of its own speed. I got home, pulled into my driveway, and just sat there for a long time. I didn't want to get out. The 10 feet from my car to my front door felt like a mile-long gauntlet. I finally made a run for it, fumbled with my keys, and got inside, locking the door behind me and leaning against it, my heart still going a million miles an hour. I didn't sleep much that night. Every little noise from outside made me jump. I kept replaying those few seconds over and over in my head. The skid, the headlights, the creature, the man in the truck, his face, the confirmation in his eyes. The next day, I went to work feeling like a zombie. I was in a fog, jumpy and distracted. I work in a small office in Rogersville, just a handful of us. Around mid-morning, I was in the break room getting coffee, and my co-worker Mike came in. He could tell I was out of it. "Rough night?" he asked. I hesitated. I hadn't planned on telling anyone. It sounded crazy, but it just came tumbling out. I told him about the drive home, the thing crossing the road, the other driver, the whole thing. I kept it brief, my voice low. As I was talking, Mike's expression changed from casual concern to something else. Something intense. When I finished, he was just staring at me. "What kind of truck was the other guy driving?" he asked, his voice quiet. The question threw me. "I don't know, a big one, dark color, maybe a Ford. It was a pickup." "Was he wearing a cap, a baseball cap?" A cold chill, completely separate from the air conditioning, washed over me. Yeah, he was. Mike slowly leaned back against the counter. "That was my father-in-law. He called me last night. He was all worked up. He was driving my boys home from baseball practice. He told me the exact same story, word for word." The floor felt like it dropped out from under me. The confirmation was one thing when it was a stranger on the road. This was different. This was a connection. This was real in a way that was suddenly, terrifyingly anchored in my normal, everyday life. "He described your car," Mike continued, his eyes wide. "He said you looked just as scared as he felt. He said the thing was covered in long black hair, and it ran like a man, but faster than any man could ever run." I just nodded, unable to speak. The briefcase flying off the seat, the smell of burnt rubber, the way the other driver's voice shook, details only he and I could know. Mike looked around to make sure we were alone. Then he stepped closer. "You know, around here, there's stories. My granddaddy used to talk about them. People see things in these woods. They call it Bigfoot or a Sasquatch. I never put much stock in it until now." He said a few other guys in the county had mentioned weird things over the years. Huge footprints, strange howls they couldn't place, something big moving through the trees just out of sight. It was all local gossip, the kind of thing you laugh about. I wasn't laughing. I never saw it again. I still drive that road because I have to, but I'm never not scared on it now. I white-knuckle the wheel the whole way, my eyes constantly scanning the tree line. Every deer that flinches near the road makes my heart stop. I saw something that I can't explain, something that shouldn't exist, and the worst part, the part that keeps me up at night, isn't just the memory of the creature itself. It's the look in that other driver's eyes, Mike's father-in-law, a look that said his world had just broken, same as mine. And it's the fact that the next day, in a brightly lit break room, a man I've known for years connected my nightmare to his own family. That's what made it real. That's what convinced me there's something in those woods, and it saw us too. Story 14. We'd been planning this trip for a couple of weeks. My cousin was always the outdoorsy type. He's a Baptist preacher now, which kinda adds to the whole weirdness of it. And he'd talked up this spot like it was some hidden paradise. Our friend, let's just call him Mike for simplicity, though I don't think I ever used his name much back then. He was along for the ride. Mike was a quiet guy, not easily spooked, which made what happened even more unsettling. We got to the pond around 8 o'clock that evening. The sun had just dipped below the trees, leaving that hazy twilight where everything looks kinda soft and blurry. The air was cool but not cold, with that damp smell you get near water, mixed with the scent of pine and wet earth. We parked the truck on a gravel patch near the shore, and I remember the crunch of our boots on the stones as we unloaded the gear. We had this old aluminum boat, one of those lightweight ones that's easy to carry, but tips if you move too fast. We brought fishing poles, a cooler with sandwiches and sodas, and this Coleman lantern that hissed when you lit it. It was our main source of light once it got dark. The pond itself was maybe a couple of acres wide, surrounded by thick woods on all sides, except for a small dam at one end. The water was dark and still, like black glass, and you could hear the occasional splash of a fish or the rustle of leaves in the breeze. It felt peaceful, almost too quiet, but in a good way. We pushed the boat into the water, the metal scraping against the mud, and climbed in. My cousin took the oars because he knew the pond best, and Mike and I settled in with our rods. We didn't talk much at first, just enjoyed the silence, the way the stars started popping out overhead. The lantern was hanging from a hook in the middle of the boat, casting this warm, flickering glow that made everything feel cozy. We fished for what felt like an hour or so, not catching much, just a couple of small bass that we threw back. I remember laughing about something stupid, probably a joke Mike made, and for a while it was just one of those perfect nights, the kind where you forget about school or work and just exist. But then, out of nowhere, everything shifted. It started with this sound, a deafening scream that ripped through the silence like nothing I'd ever heard before. It wasn't human, and it wasn't an animal I recognized, not a coyote or a bobcat, though I've heard plenty of those growing up in Georgia. This was deeper, raw, like something huge and enraged was letting out all its fury at once. It came from the woods below the dam, maybe 100 yards away, and it was so loud it felt like it was right on top of us. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest, and I could see my cousin and Mike do the same. The fishing rod slipped from my hand and clattered against the boat, but I didn't even notice at first. The scream echoed for what felt like forever, and then it was followed by this crashing noise, like something big was plowing through the underbrush. Not running, more like charging, with heavy, deliberate steps that made the ground vibrate. I could hear branches snapping and leaves crunching, and it was getting closer fast. My cousin was the first to snap out of it. "Paddle!" he yelled, his voice shaky but urgent. He grabbed the oars and started rowing toward shore, and Mike and I scrambled to help, using our hands to paddle because we didn't have extra oars. The boat rocked violently, water sloshing over the sides, and I remember the cold wetness soaking through my jeans. As we paddled, I kept glancing toward the woods, but it was too dark to see anything clearly. The Coleman lantern was hissing away, casting these jerky shadows that made everything seem even more menacing. Then I saw it, or rather, I saw movement. Along the pond's edge, something was keeping pace with us. It was big, way bigger than a person, and it was moving fast, crashing through the bushes without slowing down. I couldn't make out a shape, just this dark, hulking mass that seemed to blend into the trees, but I could hear its steps. Heavy, thudding steps that sounded like they belonged to something massive, something that shouldn't be there. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt this cold dread wash over me. Mike was muttering under his breath something like, "What the hell is that?" but none of us had an answer. The entity, I don't know what else to call it, was staying just out of the lantern's full light, but close enough that I could sense its presence. It was like it was toying with us, matching our speed as we frantically made for the shore. The hissing of the lantern seemed louder now, almost mocking, and the light flickered as if it was struggling too. We were maybe 20 feet from the bank when the thing let out another sound. This low grumble that was more vibration than noise. It made the hair on my arms stand up. My cousin was rowing like his life depended on it, which it probably did, and I could see the panic in his eyes. He's not someone who scares easily. He's always been the level-headed one, but in that moment he looked terrified. Mike was gripping the side of the boat so hard his knuckles were white, and I was just trying not to vomit from the fear. Finally, the boat scraped against the muddy bottom near the shore. We didn't even bother to tie it up or anything. We just jumped out, stumbling in the shallow water, and started dragging the boat onto land. My shoes were filled with mud, and I could feel the squelch with every step. The whole time, I could still hear that thing moving along the tree line, its steps heavy and fast, like it was waiting for us to make a wrong move. We didn't look back. We just hauled that boat up the bank and toward the truck. Getting the boat into the truck bed was a nightmare. It was lightweight, but we were so panicked that we fumbled with it, the aluminum clanging against the tailgate. I kept expecting to feel a hand, or something, grab me from behind. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst, and my lungs burned from breathing too fast. We finally got the boat secured, and then we piled into the cab. My cousin was driving, and he didn't even shut his door properly before he cranked the engine and slammed the gas. The tires spun on the gravel, kicking up rocks, and we shot off down the dirt road that led back to the main highway. I remember looking out the back window, but it was too dark to see anything. The Coleman lantern was still in the boat, hissing away, and its light faded quickly as we sped off. No one spoke for the first few minutes. We just sat there, breathing heavily, the only sounds being the rumble of the engine and the wind whipping through the partially open windows. After a while, my cousin finally said, "What was that?" His voice was hoarse, like he'd been screaming, but he hadn't. Mike just shook his head, and I didn't have any words. We drove all the way back to town in silence, and when we dropped Mike off, he didn't even say goodbye, just got out and hurried inside. My cousin and I didn't talk about it much after that night. It was like an unspoken agreement to pretend it never happened. But years later, after he'd become a preacher, I brought it up. We were at a family gathering, and I asked him if he remembered that night. He got real quiet, then looked me in the eye and said it wasn't a cat. It was something much bigger. That was all he said, but it confirmed what I'd always felt. We'd encountered something out there, something that didn't fit into any box I knew. Bigfoot, whatever. I don't like putting a name to it because that makes it too real. But the fear has never really left me. Even now, when I'm out in the woods, I get this uneasy feeling, like I'm being watched, and that scream. I'll never forget that scream. It's like it's etched into my brain, a reminder that there are things in this world we just can't explain. Story 15. Okay, so I've never told anyone this before, not even my family, because honestly, who would believe me? But it's been eating at me for years, and I need to get it off my chest. I was working as a US Geological Survey worker back in April of 2007, specifically April 11th. I remember the date because it was one of those days that just sticks with you, you know, the kind where everything starts normal and then, well, I'll get to that. I'd been with the survey for 20 years at that point, mostly stationed in the Three Sisters area of Deschutes County, Oregon. It's beautiful country, real rugged, with dense forests and those volcanic peaks looming in the background. My job was to monitor seismic instruments, checking for any earth movements, making sure the equipment was running smooth, that kind of thing. It's usually pretty solitary work, which I've always liked. Just me, the trees, and the quiet. I knew the area like the back of my hand, every trail, every creek, every weird rock formation. I'd hiked through there in all kinds of weather, seen bears, elk, even the occasional cougar, but never anything that made me question what I thought I knew about the world. That day started like any other. I woke up early, around 6 in the morning, grabbed my gear from the field office and drove out to one of the remote sites. The sky was clear, a crisp blue, and the air had that fresh, piney smell you only get in the mountains. I remember thinking it was going to be a good day, easy work, maybe wrap up early and head back to Bend for a beer. The seismic station I was checking was deep in the woods, about a mile off the main trail. I'd parked my truck at the trailhead and hiked in, carrying my toolkit and a backpack with water and snacks. The hike itself was uneventful. I was lost in my thoughts, just putting one foot in front of the other, listening to the crunch of my boots on the pine needles and the distant chatter of squirrels. I got to the instrument site around 9 in the morning. It was this small, fenced-off area with a few sensors buried in the ground and a data logger in a weatherproof box. I did my usual checks, making sure the batteries were good. The connections were tight, no animal damage, everything was fine, so I logged the data and packed up. By then, it was probably around 10:30, and I was feeling a bit thirsty. I'd brought a couple of water bottles, so I decided to take a break before heading back. I found a spot near a cluster of firs, where the ground was soft with moss, and sat down on a fallen log. I pulled out my water bottle, took a long drink, and just sat there for a minute, enjoying the quiet. That's when I first noticed something felt off. It wasn't anything obvious, just a stillness in the air, like the forest was holding its breath. The birds had stopped singing, which was weird because it was the middle of the day. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe a predator was nearby, like a hawk or something. I took another sip of water and was about to stand up when I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. At first I thought it was a deer. I've seen plenty of them around there, and they're usually skittish, but this was different. The movement was slower, more deliberate. I turned my head slowly, not wanting to startle whatever it was, and that's when I saw it. About 50 feet away, between two tall pines, something stepped out from the trees. My brain took a second to process what I was seeing because it didn't make any sense. It was huge, way bigger than any animal I'd ever seen in the wild, and it was covered in hair, this reddish-brown color that almost glinted in the sunlight filtering through the canopy. I froze. My heart started hammering in my chest so hard I could feel it in my throat. I was still sitting on the log, my water bottle halfway to my mouth, and I couldn't move. The creature paused, just standing there, and then it turned its head toward me. That's when our eyes met. I'll never forget that moment. It felt like time just stopped. Its eyes were dark, deep-set and intelligent, not like an animal's eyes, but something else, something that felt almost human. We locked eyes for what felt like forever, but it was probably only a few seconds. In that time, I felt this wave of pure terror wash over me. My skin went cold, and I could feel the hairs on my arms standing up. I wasn't breathing. I was just staring, completely paralyzed. Then, without any warning, it turned away. It didn't run or hurry. It just strode off into the forest, moving with this effortless grace that was terrifying because of its size. I watched it disappear into the trees, and for a long moment, I just sat there, stunned. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped my water bottle. I finally managed to stand up, my legs feeling like jelly, and I just stood there trying to process what I'd seen. My mind was racing. Was it a bear? No, bears don't walk like that, and they're not that tall, and the color was all wrong. I'd heard stories about Bigfoot, of course, but everyone always described them as dark, almost black. This thing was reddish-brown, like cinnamon or rust. I don't know what came over me, but I had to see where it went. I forced myself to walk toward the spot where it had been standing. My heart was still pounding, and every sound in the forest made me jump. When I got there, I could see its footprints in the soft soil, huge, deep impressions that were longer than my boot. But what really got me was the branch. There was a low-hanging branch from a fir tree, and I realized the creature had walked right under it. I walked over to it and stood underneath. The branch was high. I'm 6 feet tall, and I had to reach up to touch it. It was easily 9 or 10 feet off the ground. That thing had passed under it without even ducking. My stomach dropped. Whatever it was immense, way taller than any human, and it moved like it owned the place. I stood there for a few minutes just staring at the branch and the footprints, feeling this cold dread settle in my gut. I kept replaying the moment in my head, the way it looked at me, the sheer size of it, the silence. The forest was still quiet, like everything was waiting for something. I finally snapped out of it and knew I had to get out of there. I grabbed my gear and started hiking back to the truck, but this time I was hyper-aware of every sound. Every rustle in the bushes made me flinch, and I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see it again. The hike back felt twice as long as it had that morning. My mind was racing with questions. What was that thing? Why had it been there? And why did it look at me like that? When I got back to my truck, I sat in the driver's seat for a good 10 minutes, just trying to calm down. My hands were still shaking, and I had to take deep breaths to stop myself from panicking. I thought about reporting it, calling my supervisor or maybe even the Forest Service. But then I remembered the stories. People who report stuff like this get laughed at. I'd spent 20 years building a reputation as a reliable, no-nonsense guy. If I started talking about seeing a giant reddish-brown creature in the woods, they'd think I'd lost it, maybe even question my work. So I decided to keep it to myself. I drove back to the field office, finished my paperwork like nothing happened, and went home. But I couldn't shake it. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those eyes staring back at me. I felt this deep, unsettling fear that I'd never experienced before. It wasn't just the sighting, it was the contradiction. All the Bigfoot lore I'd ever heard talked about dark, shadowy figures. This thing was vivid, almost bright in the sunlight. It didn't fit, and that made it even scarier. Over the next few days, I found myself avoiding that area, making excuses to check other sites. I started paying more attention to the forest sounds, always on edge, waiting for something that never came. Even now, years later, I still think about it. I've gone back to that spot a few times, but I've never seen anything like it again. The footprints were gone after the next rain, and the branch is still there, a silent reminder. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it, but I know I didn't. The memory is too sharp, too real. I can still feel that terror, the way my body froze, the way the air went still. It's made me question everything I thought I knew about the wilderness. I used to feel at home in the woods, but now there's always this underlying unease, like I'm being watched. I've never told anyone this because, honestly, what would I say? Hey, I saw a giant reddish Bigfoot thing in Oregon, and it looked right at me. They'd lock me up. But writing it down here, maybe it'll help, or maybe not. All I know is that on April 11th, 2007, I saw something I can't explain, and it changed me forever. I still don't know what it was, and I probably never will. Story 16. It was late spring in New Jersey, and the weather had finally warmed up after a long, cold winter. I was in high school at the time, and my friend and I had this routine where we'd go fishing after school if we didn't have too much homework. That day, we'd gotten out around 3, hung out for a bit, and decided to head to our usual spot by the swamp around 5 in the evening. The sun was still pretty high, but it was starting to cast long shadows, and the air had that damp, earthy smell you get near water. We were both carrying our fishing rods and a small tackle box, just planning to relax and maybe catch some bass or sunfish. The trail we took was one we'd walked 100 times before. It cuts through this patch of woods behind our neighborhood, and it's mostly dirt and leaves, with trees crowding in on both sides. About halfway in, there's this straight section that runs for what feels like 50 yards or so. It's one of the few places where you can see ahead clearly without too many twists. We were joking around, talking about school and stuff, not really paying attention to anything else. I remember feeling the crunch of dead leaves under my sneakers and the slight breeze that made the leaves rustle overhead. It was all normal, you know. Just another afternoon. Then, out of nowhere, something moved across the trail in front of us. I mean, it happened so fast that at first I thought it was a deer or maybe a big dog. But it wasn't. This thing came from the left side of the trail and crossed to the right in just a couple of steps. It was tall, like really tall, maybe 6 or 7 feet, and it was covered in dark brown fur that looked almost black in the shadows. It didn't run, it kind of loped, taking 2 long strides that covered the whole width of the trail in what felt like a second, and then it stopped, turned its head, and looked right at us. I froze. My heart just dropped into my stomach, and I couldn't move or speak. My friend must have seen it too, because he stopped walking beside me, and I heard him gasp. The thing's eyes, I don't even know how to describe them, but they weren't human. They were dark and kind of deep set, and it felt like they were staring right through me. It wasn't a bear. I've seen bears before, and this was different. Bears move differently, and their faces are more rounded. This thing had a sort of rugged, almost human-like shape, but bulkier and covered in that thick, matted fur. It didn't make a sound, no growl or anything, just this intense silence that made the air feel heavy. After what felt like forever, but was probably only a couple of seconds, it turned away and moved off into the trees on the right side of the trail. It didn't run. It just disappeared into the underbrush like it was part of the shadows. One moment it was there, and the next, it was gone. I stood there, my hands shaking, and I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. My friend and I just stared at each other, our faces pale. I remember his eyes were wide, and he kept swallowing like he was trying to say something but couldn't. "Did you see that?" he finally whispered, his voice shaky. I nodded, still not able to form words. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what we'd just witnessed. Was it a person in a costume? But no, it moved too smoothly, too naturally, and the way it looked at us, it felt intelligent, like it knew we were there and was assessing us. The whole thing sent chills down my spine, and I had this primal urge to get the hell out of there. But then my friend said, "We should go check it out." And that's when we started arguing, not loudly, because we were both scared shitless, but in hushed, frantic tones. "Are you crazy?" I said, my voice coming out as a croak. "That thing could be dangerous. What if it's still there?" "But what was it?" he insisted. "We can't just leave without knowing. Maybe it was someone messing with us." I shook my head. "No way, man. That wasn't a person. Did you see how it moved? And the size of it? It's not human." We went back and forth for what felt like minutes, but it was probably less than that. My heart was still hammering, and I kept glancing toward where it had disappeared, half expecting it to come back. The woods suddenly felt oppressive, like the trees were closing in on us. The usual sounds, birds chirping, insects buzzing, had gone quiet, and all I could hear was our ragged breathing and the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. Finally, my friend won the argument, mostly because I was too scared to go back alone, and I didn't want him to go by himself, so we slowly, cautiously, walked toward the spot where the thing had crossed. Every step felt like it took forever, and I was hyper-aware of every little sound around us. My senses were on overdrive. I could smell the swampy odor of damp earth and decay, which was always there, but now it seemed stronger, almost suffocating. The air was cool against my skin, but I was sweating under my clothes, my shirt sticking to my back. When we reached the spot, there was nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign that anything had been there at all. The ground was soft and muddy in places, but there were no tracks that looked out of the ordinary, just our own sneaker prints and some animal trails. We poked around for a bit, using our fishing rods to push aside leaves and ferns, but it was like the thing had vanished into thin air. I remember feeling a mix of relief and dread. Relief that it was gone, but dread because if there was no trace, what did that mean? It made the whole experience feel even more unreal, like we'd imagined it. But I knew we hadn't. The image of it turning to look at us was burned into my brain. We didn't say much after that. We just stood there for a minute looking around, and then my friend muttered, "Let's get out of here." We didn't even bother with fishing. We just turned around and started walking back the way we came. The walk home felt twice as long as the walk there. We kept looking over our shoulders, jumping at every little noise. A squirrel scrambling up a tree, a branch snapping in the distance. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that those eyes were still on us. My skin was crawling, and I had this constant knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. By the time we got back to the edge of the woods, near our neighborhood, the sun was lower in the sky, casting an orange glow, but it didn't feel warm or comforting. It felt eerie, like the world had shifted and nothing was safe anymore. We stopped before splitting up to go to our houses, and my friend turned to me, his face serious. "We can't tell anyone about this," he said. "They'll think we're lying or crazy." I nodded, agreeing completely. The last thing I wanted was to be the kid who saw a monster in the woods. So we made a pact right there, standing on the sidewalk, to keep it between us. But as I walked the rest of the way home, the fear didn't fade. It settled deep inside me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again, the dark shape, the way it moved, that intense stare. I'd wake up sweating, convinced I heard something outside my window. Even now, years later, I sometimes get that same chill when I'm in the woods or when it gets dark early. I've never gone back to that trail, and I doubt I ever will. Whatever it was, it felt ancient and out of place, like it didn't belong in our world. And the worst part is, I have no explanation for it. No one does. It's just this thing that happened, and it haunts me to this day. Story 17. I was 14 years old back in 1958, and I lived in this small town in Alabama that was so quiet, you could hear a pin drop most days. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and nothing much ever happened, which is why what I saw that day stuck with me for the rest of my life. I'm sharing this now because I've kept it bottled up for too long, and lately I've heard whispers from others around here who've seen similar things, so maybe it's time to get it off my chest. That afternoon, I was out in the woods south of the city park, just like I did most days after school. It was my escape. The park was nice with its swings and picnic tables, but the woods behind it felt wild and free, a place where I could be alone with my thoughts. The air was thick with that late summer humidity, the kind that makes your shirt stick to your back, even if you're just standing still. I remember the sky was starting to turn those shades of orange and purple, signaling that dusk wasn't far off. I'd been out there for a couple of hours, just poking around, skipping stones in the creek, and climbing the old oak trees that dotted the area. I wasn't supposed to be out that late, but I'd lost track of time, like kids do. The woods weren't dense like a jungle or anything. They were patchy, with clearings here and there, and one spot in particular had this field overgrown with sagebrush that stood about 5 feet tall. It was rust-colored and scratchy, and if you pushed through it, you'd come out with little burrs all over your clothes. I was heading toward that field because I'd seen rabbits there before, and I thought maybe I could spot one before I had to head home. As I got closer, I could hear the cicadas buzzing, that steady drone that always made everything feel even more still, like the world was holding its breath. I was just standing at the edge of the field, squinting into the distance, when I noticed something moving along a path that cut through the sagebrush. At first, I thought it was a deer, or maybe a person from town. Sometimes folks would take shortcuts through there, but the way it moved caught my eye right away. It was tall, really tall and dark from head to about its waist, like it was covered in something matted and shadowy. The head was bent forward slightly, like it was looking down at the ground as it walked, and it moved with this slow, deliberate pace that wasn't jerky or hurried. It wasn't running or anything. It was just gliding along. almost like it was part of the landscape. I froze where I was, my heart starting to thump a little harder in my chest. I remember thinking, what is that? Because it didn't move like any animal I'd ever seen. Deer bounce when they run, and bears. Well, we didn't have bears around there, but I'd seen pictures. They lumber. This thing was smooth, almost graceful, but in a way that felt wrong, like it didn't belong. I took a step closer, careful not to make noise, and I crouched down behind a thicket of bushes so I could get a better look without being seen. The sagebrush was so tall that I could only see the top half of whatever it was from the waist up, and that's when I started to realize how big it really was. It had to be around 8 feet tall, maybe even more, because it towered over the brush like a giant. The longer I watched, the more details I picked up. The color was a deep, dark brown, almost black, and it looked shaggy, like old fur or maybe even wet leaves clinging to it. I couldn't see its face clearly because of the angle and the fading light, but the shape of the head was broad and rounded, not pointed like a deer's. It didn't have any clothes on or anything. It was just this massive, dark form moving through the field, and the way it held itself, the head bent forward, made it seem like it was focused on something, maybe tracking a scent or just navigating the path. I'd heard stories about Bigfoot from older kids, but I always thought they were just tall tales, something to scare us into staying out of the woods after dark. But standing there watching this thing, I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the cooling air. My breath caught in my throat, and I could feel my palms getting sweaty. I remember clutching the fabric of my pants, my knuckles turning white, because part of me wanted to run, but another part was glued to the spot, just staring. It was like my brain was trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but it couldn't. This wasn't a person. People don't move like that, and they sure as hell aren't that tall. I'd seen my dad, who was 6 feet, and this thing made him look small. The realization hit me slowly, like a wave building up, and then all at once, it crashed over me. Whatever this was, it wasn't human. That's when the fear really set in. It wasn't just a little scare. It was this deep, gut-wrenching terror that made my legs feel like jelly. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, so loud I was afraid the thing might hear it too. The air felt heavier, like it was pressing down on me, and I started to notice little things, the way the cicadas had gone quiet, like they'd sensed something off, or how the breeze had died down, leaving everything unnaturally still. I kept watching, hoping it would turn and I'd see it was just a trick of the light. But then it did turn, and that's when I saw it fully for a second before it disappeared into the forest on the other side of the field. When it turned, its head lifted slightly, and I got a glimpse of its profile. It wasn't like any animal I knew. No snout, no ears sticking out, just this broad, dark shape, with what looked like shoulders that were too wide and powerful. It didn't make a sound, no grunt or snap of twigs, just that silent, fluid movement. And then it was gone, swallowed up by the trees, like it had never been there at all. For a moment I just stayed crouched there, my body trembling. I couldn't move. I was too scared that it might come back, or that I'd drawn attention to myself. My mind was racing, trying to piece it together. Was it a bear? No, bears don't walk upright like that for long, and they're not that tall, a person in a costume. But who would be out here in the middle of nowhere, dressed like that and moving so strangely? It didn't add up. The more I thought about it, the more I knew deep down that I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to see. That's when the panic took over. I scrambled to my feet, my legs wobbling, and I started running. I didn't look back. I just ran as fast as I could, crashing through the underbrush, not caring about the branches scratching my arms or the burrs catching on my clothes. All I could think was, get home now. My heart was hammering against my ribs, and my breath came in ragged gasps. I remember the taste of dirt and sweat in my mouth, and the way my feet slipped on loose leaves. But I didn't slow down. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle in the bushes made me jump, and I kept expecting to feel a hand, or something worse, grab me from behind. The run home felt like it took forever, even though it was probably only 10 or 15 minutes. I burst out of the woods and into the park, where the streetlights were starting to flicker on, and I didn't stop until I was at my front door. I was panting, my chest heaving, and I could feel tears stinging my eyes from the fear and the effort. I fumbled with the doorknob and stumbled inside, slamming the door shut behind me like I was keeping the devil out. My mum was in the kitchen, cooking dinner, and she looked up with a frown when she saw me. "What in the world is wrong with you?" she asked, her voice sharp with concern. I was a mess. My clothes were torn, my face was flushed, and I was shaking all over. I tried to tell her what I'd seen, but the words came out in a jumble. "There was something in the woods," I gasped. "Something big and dark, and it wasn't human." She wiped her hands on her apron and came over, putting a hand on my shoulder. "Calm down now," she said, but I could tell she didn't really believe me. "You probably just saw a deer or a shadow. You know how your imagination gets the best of you out there." I insisted, describing it as best I could, the height, the color, the way it moved, but she just shook her head and told me to wash up for dinner. My dad came in from the living room, and when I tried to tell him, he chuckled and said, "Sounds like you've been listening to too many ghost stories, son. Maybe you should stick to the park from now on." That hurt, more than I expected. I wasn't a liar, and I wasn't prone to making things up, but they brushed it off like it was nothing. I could see it in their eyes. They thought I was just a kid getting spooked by the dark, so I shut up about it. But inside, I was screaming. How could they not see how terrified I was? How could they not understand that something was out there? I went to bed that night with the image burned into my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again. That dark, towering figure moving through the sagebrush. I couldn't sleep. I just lay there, listening to the sounds of the house, jumping at every creak. The fear didn't go away. It settled deep in my bones, a constant hum of dread that stayed with me for years. I stopped going into those woods alone after that. Even when friends wanted to explore, I made excuses, or I'd only go if there was a big group. I'd get this tightness in my chest whenever I got too close, like my body was remembering that day and warning me to stay away. It took me a long time to even talk about it again. And even now, decades later, I get chills thinking about it. What gets me is that over the years, I've heard others from this town mention similar things. A tall, dark figure in the woods, sightings around the same area. It's not just me. It's like this shared secret that no one wants to admit is real. But that day, in that field, I know what I saw. I don't have a name for it, and I don't need one. The memory is enough to keep me up some nights. And that's why I'm writing this down now, because maybe someone out there will read it and know they're not alone. But honestly, I still can't explain it, and I doubt I ever will. Story 18. It was a typical early fall day in Indiana, the kind where the air starts to get that crisp edge, but it's still warm enough that you don't need a jacket until the sun goes down. My cousin was visiting from the military. He'd been stationed overseas for a while, and we hadn't seen each other in years. He's always been the adventurous type, the one who's into survival stuff and outdoor skills, so he suggested we go target shooting. I live near Dunkirk, and there's this spot north of town that's pretty secluded. Thick woods, old logging trails, the kind of place where you can make some noise without bothering anyone. We headed out around midday, just the two of us and my German shepherd, Duke. Duke's my shadow. He's a big, loyal dog, trained well, and he's never been one to spook easily. He loves being outside, so I brought him along to run around while we shot. The drive out there was uneventful. We took my truck, windows down, with the smell of damp earth and fallen leaves filling the cab. Duke was panting in the back seat, his tail thumping against the seat every time we hit a bump. My cousin was telling stories from his deployment, laughing about some of the dumb stuff they'd get up to, and I was just enjoying the company. We pulled off the main road onto a dirt path that cuts through this 40-acre field before it dips into the woods. The field was mostly harvested corn, so it was just stubble and dry stalks, with the woods looming dark and dense beyond it. We parked near the edge of the trees, where there's a small clearing that's perfect for setting up targets. I had a couple of paper targets stapled to a cardboard box, and we spent the next couple of hours shooting. The sound of the gunshots echoed through the woods, but it felt normal, just us blowing off steam. Duke was having a blast, chasing after the spent casings and sniffing around the trees. He's usually so confident, trotting around like he owns the place. At one point, he even wandered a little into the woods, but he always came back when I called him. Nothing felt off. It was just a good day out. As the sun started to dip lower, the light turned golden, and the shadows in the woods got longer. It was getting close to evening, so we packed up our gear. We'd shot through all our ammo, and my ears were ringing a bit. We loaded everything back into the truck, and Duke jumped in, his tongue lolling out like he'd had the time of his life. We drove back to town, which is only about a 10-minute ride, and got to my place just as it was starting to get dark. My house is on the outskirts, so it's quiet, with a big yard and that same field not too far away. We were inside, unloading the guns to clean them when it happened. It must have been around 7 in the evening. The TV was on low, and we were talking about grabbing some dinner when this sound cut through everything. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before, deep, powerful and raw, like a scream, but with so much force behind it that it felt physical. It came from the direction of the woods where we'd just been, and it was loud, I mean really loud. It carried across that 40-acre field like it was right next to us, and I swear I felt the windows in my house vibrate. My cousin froze mid-sentence, and I just stood there, my heart hammering in my chest. For a second, neither of us moved. Then Duke, who'd been lying on the floor near the door, went rigid, his ears pinned back, and he let out this low growl that built into a whine. I'd never seen him like that. His whole body was tense, and he was staring at the front door like something was about to come through it. I keep him on a leash when we're outside, but inside, he's usually calm. Without thinking, I went to the door to see if I could hear anything else, and I unclipped his leash from his collar. Big mistake. The second he was free, he bolted. Not just a little jump. He slammed through the front screen door, tearing it open, and dashed into the house. He ran straight to the back bedroom and hid under the bed, something he's never done in his life. Not even during thunderstorms or fireworks. I was stunned. My cousin was already at the door, peering out into the darkness. "What the hell was that?" he said, his voice tight. He's been in combat zones, so he's not easily shaken, but he looked pale. I could hear Duke whining from the bedroom, a high-pitched, scared sound that made my stomach twist. I tried to call him back, but he wouldn't budge. I even went to the bedroom and crouched down. He was trembling, pressed against the wall, and when I reached for him, he shied away. This is a dog who's trained to obey commands, who's not even allowed indoors most of the time because he sheds so much. And here he was, refusing to come out. That's when I knew something was really wrong. My cousin suggested we go check it out. "Maybe it was an animal in distress," he said, but his tone didn't sound convinced. He grabbed a flashlight and started toward the door. I stopped him. "No way," I told him. "Look at Duke. He's terrified. If he's that scared, we shouldn't be going out there." My cousin argued a little, saying it could be nothing, but I stood my ground. I've always trusted Duke's instincts. He's saved me from stepping on a snake once, and he's never led me wrong. So we stayed put. We locked the doors and windows, and for the next hour, we just listened. Nothing else happened, but the silence felt heavy, like the woods were holding their breath. We didn't sleep much that night. Every little noise had us on edge, and Duke stayed under the bed until morning. When the sun finally came up, the fear had settled into this low-grade dread. My cousin was determined to go back and see if we could find anything. I was hesitant, but curiosity got the better of me. We loaded up the truck again, and Duke refused to come with us. I had to practically drag him to the door, and even then he whined and pulled back. In the end, I left him inside. I didn't want to force him. The drive back to the woods felt different. The morning was quiet, with a mist hanging over the field, and the woods looked darker than usual, even in the daylight. We parked in the same spot, and the first thing I noticed was the silence. No birds, no rustling, just dead quiet. We started walking into the trees, following the path we'd taken the day before. The ground was soft from recent rain, and our footsteps seemed too loud. My cousin had his hand on his hip where he keeps a knife, and I was clutching a stick like it would do any good. We didn't have to go far before we saw it. On several trees near where we'd been shooting, there were these deep scratches, way up high. I'm not tall, I'm about 5'10", and these marks were at least 6 feet off the ground. They were fresh, gouged into the bark like something had dug in with massive claws. The wood was splintered and raw, and on one tree, the scratches were so deep you could see the lighter wood underneath. My cousin examined them closely. "Looks like bear marks," he said, but his voice was uncertain. "We both know there are no bears around here. Indiana hasn't had a wild bear population in decades, and even if one wandered in, it wouldn't explain the scream or Duke's reaction." We walked a bit farther, and the scratches were on multiple trees, all about the same height, all facing the direction of my house. It was like whatever made them was moving toward us. The hair on my arm stood up, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, feeling like we were being watched. We didn't stay long, maybe 20 minutes, before we both agreed to get out of there. On the way back to the truck, I noticed something else. The air smelled odd, like wet dog and something else, something musky and foul. I've spent enough time in the woods to know that wasn't normal. Since then, I haven't gone back to those woods. My cousin left a few days later, and we've talked about it a couple of times, but neither of us has any answers. Duke still gets nervous when we're outside after dark, and he won't go near the tree line in my yard. I've asked around, but no one else has reported anything strange. Part of me wants to believe it was just some weird animal, but deep down, I know it wasn't. That scream, the scratches, Duke's fear, it all adds up to something I can't explain. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, I think I can still hear it, echoing in my head, and I'm right back there, frozen in my living room, with my heart pounding and no idea what's out there. Story 19. It was late April 2007. I remember the date because it was the last time I ever went mushroom hunting, the last time I felt safe in the woods. Hell, it's the last time I felt completely safe. Period. My husband and I, we had this tradition. Every spring, when the ground warmed up just right, we'd head out to Big Walnut Creek in Putnam County. It was our spot. Quiet, away from everything, and the morels there were always plentiful. That day started like any other. The air was cool, but the sun was out, cutting through the bare branches of the trees that were just starting to bud. It smelled like damp earth and old leaves. We parked the truck off the old logging road, the one that's more two ruts than a road, and got our baskets. We'd been at it for maybe an hour and we'd found a few, but not the mother lodge we were hoping for. My husband suggested we split up to cover more ground. It made sense. The creek curved, and he wanted to check the sandy bank on the other side. I decided to head inland, up a slight rise where the elm trees were thick. We'd done it a dozen times before. We had whistles, the kind you blow for a dog, to signal if we found a big patch or if we were ready to head back. It never felt risky. It just felt efficient. So I went one way, he went the other. The woods got thicker fast once you moved away from the water. The light changed from that bright, open sunshine to a dim, greenish glow filtering down through the canopy. It was quieter, too. The sound of the creek faded to a distant mumble, and all I could hear was my own footsteps crunching on last year's leaves. I was focused, my eyes scanning the ground, looking for that honeycomb pattern. And then I started noticing something weird. I'd see a spot where the leaf litter was disturbed, and there'd be the stump of a morel, freshly picked, just the stem left in the ground. At first I was annoyed. I thought, damn, someone else beat us here. But then I saw another one, and another. They weren't just picked, they were picked clean, like whatever took them knew exactly what it was doing. It was too precise for a deer or a raccoon. They just ripped the whole thing up. This was different. It felt deliberate. I pushed the unease down. I told myself it was another hunter, maybe a quiet one who'd come and gone before we arrived. I kept moving up the rise, and then I saw it. A perfect, beautiful morel, its cap all wrinkled and grey, nestled right at the base of a big sycamore. My heart gave a little jump. That's the feeling you hunt for. That little thrill of discovery. I crouched down, my knees popping, and reached for it. My fingers were just about to close around the stem when I heard it. Breathing. It wasn't my own. It was slow, deep. A heavy, rhythmic sound, like air moving in and out of a huge bellows. It was so low and resonant I felt it in my chest, more than I heard it with my ears. It was coming from my left. My head snapped up. 50 feet away, maybe less, it was standing there. My brain just stuttered. It couldn't process what I was seeing. It was massive. I'm not talking about a big man. I'm talking about something that made the trees around it look smaller. Its body was thick, impossibly broad, and covered in hair. Not fur, but long, shaggy hair, the color of wet, dark earth, almost blackish brown. It was matted in places, like it had been pushing through thickets. It had no neck. Its head just seemed to sit right on top of these enormous rounded shoulders. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees, and they were thick too, like tree limbs. But the worst part was its face. It was dark, leathery looking, with deep-set eyes that held a stillness that was utterly alien. It wasn't snarling, it wasn't hunching to attack. It was just standing there, motionless, watching me. Time stopped. I was frozen in that crouch, my hand still outstretched for the mushroom. The air felt thick, hard to breathe. The only sound in the whole world was that slow, deep hoo-ha coming from it. Its chest would rise and then fall, and the sound would roll out. It was calm. That's what terrified me more than anything. It was completely, utterly calm, just observing me like I was a curious insect. My mind was screaming, a wordless, primal shriek of terror. I had to get to my husband. I had to call him. That thought, the need for him, was the only thing that broke the paralysis. I turned my head, just a fraction, to look back in the direction I'd come from, to where I thought he might be. My throat was so tight, I didn't know if I could make a sound. And the moment I moved, it moved. It didn't run. It didn't charge. It shifted its weight with a fluid, powerful grace that was horrifying for something so big. In one smooth motion, it stepped sideways, putting the trunk of a large oak tree between us. It wasn't hiding. It was using cover. It was intelligent. It knew I was looking for it, and it positioned itself so I couldn't see it anymore. That's when the terror truly struck. This wasn't some mindless animal. This thing was thinking. It was assessing the situation. I screamed. It wasn't a word, just a raw, ripped from the gut sound of pure fear. I dropped my basket, the morels scattering, and I ran. I didn't look back. I just ran. Blindly, I crashed through the undergrowth, branches whipping at my face and arms, scratching my skin. I felt a stinging on my cheek and knew I'd been cut. I didn't care. My only thought was to get away, to get back to the creek, to my husband. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard, I thought it would burst. My lungs burned. Every snap of a twig behind me sent a fresh jolt of ice through my veins. Was it following? Was it right behind me? I could hear my own frantic gasps and the thunder of my footsteps, but underneath it all, In the spaces between my panic, I thought I could still hear it, not running, but moving. A heavy rhythmic thump, thump of footsteps keeping pace with me, just out of sight. I broke out of the thicker woods and stumbled down the slope toward the creek. The world tilted, my foot caught on a root, and I went down hard, my hands skidding in the gravel of the creek bank. I scrambled back up, sobbing now, my body trembling uncontrollably, and then I heard my husband's voice, shouting my name. It was the best sound I'd ever heard in my life. I screamed his name back, my voice cracking. He came crashing through the brush from the other side of the creek, his face white as a sheet. He splashed across the water, not even caring that his boots were filling, and grabbed me, holding me so tight I could feel his heart pounding against my chest. He was shaking as badly as I was. What happened? What is it? He kept asking, his voice frantic. I was babbling, pointing back toward the rise, choking on my words. There's something, a thing, back there. He held me at arm's length, his eyes wide. I heard it, he whispered. His voice was shaky, thin. After you left, I heard something pacing, back and forth, on the other side of the creek from me, heavy steps and a sound, like a low muttering, a grumbling. My blood went cold. It had been tracking him too. The entire time we were split up, it hadn't just been watching me. It had been moving between us, the picked-over mushrooms. It had been there before us. It had been in the area, and it knew we were there. It was herding us, or studying us, or... I don't know. The thought made me feel sick. We didn't say another word. We just ran for the truck. He held my hand so tight it hurt, pulling me along, both of us stumbling, looking back over our shoulders every few seconds. The woods, which had always felt like a peaceful escape, now felt like a prison, every shadow a potential hiding place. We reached the truck, fumbling with the doors, our hands shaking so much it took me 2 tries to get the handle to work. We scrambled inside, and he slammed the locks down. The sound of the doors locking was the first small bit of safety I'd felt in what felt like a lifetime. He started the engine, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. He threw it into gear and we spun around, the tires kicking up gravel and dirt. He drove too fast down that bumpy logging road, the truck lurching and bouncing. Neither of us spoke. We just stared straight ahead, our knuckles white on the dashboard and the steering wheel. As we reached the end of the road and turned onto the paved county road, I finally dared to look back. I leaned forward, my eyes going to the rear-view mirror. The woods were a dark green wall behind us, and there, right at the tree line, where the shadows were deepest, I saw it, a patch of darkness that was darker than all the rest, a solid, massive shape. It wasn't moving. It was just standing there, watching us go. I didn't say anything to my husband. I just stared into that mirror until the curve in the road took the woods out of sight. We never went back. Not that spring, not any spring after. We sold our baskets at a garage sale that summer. We don't even like to go on hikes in state parks anymore. The memory of it is just too sharp, too real. It's been years, but I can still close my eyes and see it standing there. Not a monster, not a raging beast. Just a thing, a calm, intelligent, watching thing. And I can still hear that slow, deep breathing and feel the absolute soul-crushing certainty that it knew exactly what we were and that we were in its world, not the other way around. The most chilling part, the thing that haunts me late at night, wasn't the size or the strength. It was the quiet, calculated observation in its eyes. It was just looking. And I'll never know why.